This is Audible.
The Thing, a Horror. Written by Kamal Khalaf. Narrated by Alex Johnston. For those who have faced their deepest fears and emerged stronger, and for those who are still fighting to break free. Part 1. The Discovery. Chapter 1. The Frozen Frontier. The Antarctic wind howled relentlessly, a mournful dirge that echoed across a barren, ice-encrusted wilderness. The horizon, a blur of white and gray, stretched endlessly as though the earth itself were lost in a frozen dream. Here, amid the ruthless silence and unyielding cold, lay a world untouched by time, a domain where the elements reigned supreme, indifferent to the lives of those who dared traverse its desolation. In the distance, a solitary research outpost clung to existence like a fragile ember in an unforgiving storm. Its metal walls, scarred by the ceaseless assault of snow and ice, bore silent testimony to the hardships endured by its inhabitants. The structure stood isolated, a lone sentinel on the edge of oblivion, its lights flickering feebly against the encroaching darkness of the polar night. Even the heavens above seemed reluctant to offer comfort, their pale luminescence failing to pierce the veil of perpetual gloom. Every gust of wind carried with it a whisper of forgotten secrets, echoes of ancient mysteries and half-remembered legends of a time when the earth was young and untamed. It was as if the very air vibrated with the weight of history, of events that had shaped this land long before human footprints marred its surface. The frozen frontier was not merely a place, but a repository of stories, waiting to be unearthed by those brave enough to listen. Among those few brave souls was a covert Nordic research team, dispatched on a mission shrouded in secrecy and steeped in scientific ambition. Their objective was clear, though its implications were far from ordinary: to investigate anomalies detected deep within the Antarctic ice, a series of disturbances that defied explanation. The mission, cloaked in mystery, had been devised by an organization with resources and ambitions that stretched far beyond conventional scientific inquiry. For the team, the promise of discovery was tempered by an undercurrent of unease, as though fate itself had marked their path with a subtle warning. Drifting over the icy expanse in a specially modified twin-engine aircraft, the team had been transported from their base in Norway to the remote landing site near the research outpost. The flight had been long and arduous, a journey punctuated by the hum of engines and the intermittent bursts of static from the radio. Each member of the team carried within them a mixture of trepidation and determination, aware that they were venturing into a realm where few had ever dared to tread. Leading the Nordic contingent was Dr. Henrik Falk, a man of quiet intensity and resolute purpose. His face, weathered by years of exploration and punctuated by a pair of steely eyes, betrayed little of the turmoil he felt inside. Henrik had dedicated his life to the pursuit of knowledge, his curiosity as boundless as the frozen wastes they now navigated. With every mile that separated them from civilization, his anticipation grew, a silent testament to the allure of the unknown. Beside him, Dr. Astrid Nygaard, an expert in glaciology, meticulously reviewed her instruments and notes. Astrid was a woman of science whose analytical mind sought order even in the chaos of nature. She had spent countless hours studying the patterns of ice and snow, seeking to understand the hidden rhythms of the Antarctic. Now, faced with anomalies that defied her understanding, she felt both excitement and dread mingling in equal measure. Each reading, each subtle shift in the ice, whispered of forces that lay beyond the realm of human comprehension. The aircraft's interior was a temporary haven from the brutal cold outside, yet the tension among the team was palpable. Huddled together, they exchanged a few words, each absorbed in their own thoughts, bracing for the unknown challenges that awaited them. In the silence, the faint hum of machinery was the only sound, a constant reminder of the delicate balance between human endeavor and nature's overwhelming might. As the aircraft descended toward the landing site, the pilot's steady hands guided it over a landscape that was as beautiful as it was barren. Jagged ice formations jutted upward like the spires of a forgotten cathedral, their crystalline structures glistening under the faint light of a hidden sun. Below, the vast sheet of ice stretched out in all directions, a canvas painted in shades of white and blue. It was a scene of vivid contrast, nature's raw, unyielding power set against the fragile constructs of human ambition. The landing was rough, the craft shuddering as it touched down on a surface that was both slippery and unpredictable. Outside, the wind roared with renewed fury, as if to herald the arrival of something ancient and ominous. Once on the ground, the team quickly gathered their equipment, each step toward the research outpost feeling like an incremental descent into a realm of unfathomable secrets. The outpost itself was a modest structure, constructed hastily yet built with a resilience born of necessity. Corrugated metal walls and reinforced glass offered scant protection against the relentless assault of wind-driven ice and snow. Inside, the space was dimly lit and sparsely furnished, with maps, scientific instruments, and the muted hum of heaters striving against the cold. Every corner of the facility seemed to hold a story, a silent narrative of endurance in the ever-present struggle against nature's indomitable will. Dr. Falk led the team into a central chamber of the outpost, a room that served as both a command center and a refuge from the surrounding elements. A large map of the region was spread across the table, dotted with coordinates and marked with areas of interest. Here, among the scattered papers and the glow of computer screens, the team began to piece together the fragmented clues that had brought them to this remote corner of the world. Their objective was clear: to locate and investigate the anomalies detected in the ice, anomalies that might hold the key to secrets long buried beneath the frozen surface. In a quiet corner of the room, Astrid unfurled a set of satellite images, each one capturing the striking beauty and harsh reality of the Antarctic expanse. The images revealed a landscape marred by jagged crevasses, towering icebergs, and a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the patterns of the ice. To the untrained eye, the differences might have seemed trivial, mere aberrations in a seemingly uniform environment. But for those versed in the language of glaciers, these shifts were a sign, an indication that something, somewhere beneath the surface, was not as it should be. As the hours passed, the team gathered around the table, their voices low and measured as they discussed the implications of the data. There was a sense of urgency in their deliberations, a recognition that they were on the cusp of a discovery that could redefine their understanding of the Antarctic. Yet, amidst the technical jargon and scientific theories, an undercurrent of unease persisted. It was as if the very ice around them was imbued with a silent warning, a message that transcended the limits of language and logic. Outside, the landscape shifted subtly with the changing light. The deep blue of the ice was punctuated by shadows that danced like specters, fleeting shapes that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The Antarctic was a realm of extremes, a place where beauty and terror coexisted in a delicate balance. It was here, in this unforgiving environment, that the seeds of mystery had been sown, and where the truth of the anomalies lay hidden beneath layers of ice and time. The Nordic team's covert mission was one of both scientific inquiry and strategic significance. Behind the veneer of academic pursuit lay a deeper, more complex agenda. Their work was financed by agencies whose interests extended beyond the realm of pure science, into areas where geopolitical and existential concerns converged. The anomalies in the ice were not merely natural phenomena. They were potential harbingers of events that could ripple far beyond the confines of the Antarctic. And so, with each measured step and each careful observation, the team inched closer to unveiling a secret that had lain dormant for millennia. In the quiet moments between shifts and data collection, Dr. Falk found himself drawn to the vast, unyielding expanse outside. Standing at a window in the command center, he gazed at the endless ice fields, his mind wandering to thoughts both scientific and metaphysical. What did it mean for something so ancient and enigmatic to be discovered now? Had the ice always harbored such mysteries, or was this a sign of changes yet to come? These were questions that would haunt him in the days ahead, their answers as elusive as the shifting patterns of the snow. The research outpost, though isolated and vulnerable, had become a crucible for human endeavor, a place where the boundaries of knowledge were constantly being tested. Every member of the team was acutely aware of the stakes involved. There was no room for error in a land where the margin for survival was measured in seconds, and where every decision could mean the difference between life and death. In this environment, the pursuit of knowledge was both a noble quest and a perilous gamble, each experiment and observation a step further into the unknown. As dusk fell, the Antarctic skies transformed into a canvas of muted purples and grays, the fading light merging seamlessly with the deepening shadows. The temperature plummeted, and the outpost cedars struggled valiantly against the encroaching cold. Within the confines of the research station, a sense of camaraderie mingled with shared wariness. Over cups of lukewarm coffee, the team exchanged quiet observations, their conversations laced with the unspoken acknowledgement that they were far from home and far from safety. In a secluded alcove of the outpost, one of the junior researchers, Tobias, meticulously reviewed the day's findings. His hands, though steady, betrayed the tremor of nerves that came from working in such an extreme environment. Every data point, every anomaly recorded in the satellite images, was scrutinized with a careful eye. Tobias's mind was a tapestry of theories and hypotheses, each thread interwoven with the mysteries of the ice. In the depths of his thoughts, he could not shake the feeling that the anomalies were not random, that they bore the signature of something both deliberate and inexplicable. As night settled over the Antarctic, the research outpost became a fortress of subdued activity. The flickering lights and the soft hum of the electronic equipment provided a tenuous barrier against the overwhelming darkness outside. In the quiet corridors, shadows loomed large, and the sound of footsteps echoed as if in slow motion. The very architecture of the outpost seemed to breathe, its walls absorbing the whispers of the wind and the secrets carried on its icy breath. In a small, cramped room near the command center, Dr. Astrid Nygaard recorded her observations in a leather-bound journal. Her handwriting, neat yet hurried, captured the raw emotions of the day, a mixture of scientific wonder and a creeping sense of dread. She described the subtle shifts in the ice formations, the inexplicable readings on her instruments, and the lingering feeling that something ancient and unseen was stirring beneath the surface. Each word she penned was a silent plea for clarity, a desperate attempt to impose order on the chaos that lay just beyond human comprehension. The quiet mystery that enveloped the outpost seemed to deepen as the hours passed. Outside, the wind carried with it distant echoes, faint sounds that might have been the creaking of ice, or perhaps something more sinister moving beneath the frozen crust. These sounds, barely audible yet persistently unnerving, wove themselves into the fabric of the night, a constant reminder that in this realm, silence was never absolute. By the time the first hints of dawn crept over the horizon, the team had settled into a rhythm dictated by the harsh realities of their environment. The Antarctic night, long and unyielding, gave way to a pale, ghostly light that bathed the outpost in a spectral glow. It was during these early hours, in the fragile moment between night and day, that the true character of the frozen frontier revealed itself. The landscape, still and unmoving, exuded an eerie calm, as if it were holding its breath in anticipation of the day's revelations. In these moments of transition, the Nordic team found themselves drawn into quiet contemplation. Dr. Falk, ever the stoic leader, stood outside the command center, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The rising sun, muted and uncertain, cast long shadows across the ice, transforming the terrain into a labyrinth of light and dark. He wondered if this light, so feeble against the vast expanse, could ever truly illuminate the mysteries that lay hidden beneath the ice. The thought was both humbling and terrifying, a reminder that some secrets were meant to remain shrouded in darkness. Throughout the morning, the team resumed their investigations with a renewed sense of urgency. Every measurement and observation was tinged with the awareness that the anomalies they sought might be on the verge of revealing themselves in ways no one could have predicted. In hushed tones, when with careful precision, they retraced their steps, examining the very ground upon which they had landed. The interplay of light and shadow across the ice created an ever-changing landscape, one that held clues to the forces at work beneath its surface. As the day advanced, the Nordic research team encountered subtle signs that hinted at the extraordinary nature of their mission. Tiny fissures in the ice, previously hidden by a uniform sheet of snow, had begun to reveal jagged patterns and uncharacteristic formations. These cracks, like scars on the frozen face of the earth, spoke of long-dormant disturbances now reawakened. Astrid's instruments recorded minute variations in temperature and pressure, data that defied conventional explanations and whispered of hidden processes at play. It was in these details that the promise, and the peril, of the mission lay. The outpost, though modest in its construction, had become the epicenter of an unfolding enigma. Every anomaly recorded, every shift in the ice's behavior, was a piece of a puzzle that the team was determined to solve. Yet, even as they investigated deeper into the data, a persistent unsettling feeling lingered in the back of their minds, a sense that the very ice was concealing secrets too profound, too dangerous to be fully comprehended. In a quiet recess of the outpost's laboratory, Dr. Falk and Astrid pored over the latest satellite images and sensor readings. Their conversation was subdued, filled with cautious optimism and the recognition of the task's gravity. "There is a rhythm here," Astrid murmured, her eyes scanning the images with a mix of scientific curiosity and a hint of trepidation. "It's as if the ice itself is alive, reacting to forces we barely understand." Dr. Falk nodded slowly, his gaze distant as he absorbed her words. "We must remain vigilant," he replied. "Every step we take could lead us closer to revelations that may challenge everything we believe about this world." Outside the lab, the Antarctic day continued its slow, relentless progression. The wind, which had raged through the night, now whispered in softer tones as if the land itself were sighing in relief. But even in these moments of apparent calm, the sense of underlying foreboding was never far away. The isolation of the outpost, the endless expanse of ice, and the weight of untold secrets combined to create an atmosphere where every sound, every shifting shadow, held the potential for revelation, or for catastrophe. As the day wore on, the team prepared for an expedition further afield. Equipped with specialized gear and driven by the desire to explore the anomalies in greater detail, they set out into the frozen waste with measured determination. The path ahead was treacherous, marked by hidden crevasses and unstable ice formations, yet the resolve was unyielding. Each step was a deliberate act of defiance against the indifferent brutality of nature, a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who dared to venture into the unknown. In the vast silence of the Antarctic, time itself seemed to slow. The rhythmic crunch of boots on compacted snow, the occasional clatter of equipment, and the soft murmur of scientific discussion were the only sounds that punctuated the pervasive quiet. It was during these moments that the Nordic team felt the full weight of their isolation, a cold reminder that in this realm of ice and wind, humanity was but a fleeting visitor, a transient spark destined to be swallowed by the eternal winter. By the time the team returned to the outpost, dusk was descending once more, cloaking the landscape in hues of deep blue and silver. The expedition had yielded intriguing data, a series of unusual formations and anomalies that defied immediate explanation. As they reconvened in the command center, there was an unspoken acknowledgement among the researchers that their mission had taken a turn toward the extraordinary. The very fabric of the frozen frontier was beginning to reveal its hidden narrative, one that would test not only their scientific acumen, but also their resolve to confront the mysteries that lay beneath the surface. In the quiet that followed the day's endeavors, the research outpost became a sanctuary for contemplation and quiet dread. The team dispersed to their respective quarters, each retreating into solitude with the knowledge that the next phase of their mission held challenges beyond anything they had previously imagined. For Dr. Falk and Astrid, the day's discoveries were a harbinger, a forestated of the revelations and dangers that awaited them in the depths of the ice. They knew that each anomaly, each subtle shift in the frozen landscape, was a clue in a puzzle that was as vast and inscrutable as the Antarctic itself. In the solitude of his small room, Dr. Falk sat by a frost-lined window, his eyes fixed on the endless expanse of ice stretching into darkness. The quiet was profound, almost oppressive in its stillness, and yet it was in this silence that he found a strange comfort, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming uncertainty, the human spirit could endure. As the last vestiges of daylight faded away, he whispered a silent promise to himself, to uncover the secrets hidden within this frozen frontier, no matter the cost. And so, amid the relentless wind, the shifting ice, and the quiet murmur of a research outpost clinging to life, the Nordic team's covert mission had begun in earnest. In a world where every shadow could harbor a mystery, and every gust of wind might carry the echo of ancient secrets, the promise of discovery was inextricably bound with the threat of the unknown. As the Antarctic night deepened and the outpost settled into a fragile sleep, the frozen frontier stood as a silent witness to the unfolding of events that would forever alter the course of their lives. Thus ended the first day on the edge of oblivion. A day marked by quiet mystery, subtle omens, and the ever-present reminder that in the vast, unyielding silence of the Antarctic, nothing was ever as it seemed. Every footprint left in the snow, every echo in the wind, and every tremor in the ice whispered of stories yet to be told. A legacy of secrets waiting to be unearthed by those with the courage to seek the truth hidden beneath the frozen surface. Chapter 2. Unearthing the Unknown. The long Antarctic night had finally begun to wane, replaced by a feeble, uncertain light that crept over the endless ice. The Nordic research team, having settled into their routine at the isolated outpost, gathered their equipment for a day of field exploration. The mission's purpose had shifted from routine measurements and ethanol collections to a more pressing objective, to follow up on the subtle, unsettling anomalies that had been detected in the ice. Rumors of disturbances in the frozen landscape had grown louder with each passing day, and though no one spoke of it openly, an unspoken consensus had formed that something extraordinary was hidden deep within the ice. Dr. Henrik Falk, the team's resolute leader, had convened an early morning briefing in the cramped yet functional meeting room of the outpost. A large, detailed map of the surrounding ice fields hung on one wall, dotted with coordinates and tentative markings. The map had been carefully annotated by Astrid Nygaard and other team members, based on satellite imagery and sensor readings that hinted at unusual formations in a remote sector several kilometers from the outpost. "We're about to enter territory that has defied all our previous expectations," Dr. Falk began, his voice steady yet tinged with an unmistakable undercurrent of urgency. "The anomalies we've been tracking are not random. They appear to radiate from a single, concentrated source. Our objective today is to locate this source and document everything we encounter." Astrid, whose expertise in glaciology lent an air of authority to the discussion, added, "Our instruments have picked up an unusually high level of geothermal activity in that area, something that shouldn't be possible given the frigid ambient temperatures. It's as if the ice itself is concealing an internal furnace. The readings are inconsistent with known geological processes." A murmur of agreement passed through the room. The scientific data, though perplexing, was undeniable. The possibility of an unknown, perhaps even extraterrestrial element within the ice had ignited both the imagination and caution of the assembled researchers. The team assembled their gear: portable drilling equipment, specialized ice corers, advanced spectrometers and thermal imaging devices, and set out across the blinding white expanse. The trek was arduous, the bitter wind cutting through layers of clothing as if determined to erase every human imprint on this ancient land. Despite their hardships, the team pressed on, each step toward the anomaly filled with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. For hours, they navigated a maze of crevasses and unstable snow bridges. The landscape, though seemingly uniform, revealed subtle irregularities, ridges of ice that appeared unnaturally smooth, and fissures that formed strange, almost deliberate patterns. These oddities, which Astrid noted with scientific fascination, provided the first clues that they were nearing the epicenter of the disturbance. It was late in the morning when the team finally arrived at a small plateau that rose above the surrounding expanse. Here, the ice was unnervingly clear, its crystalline structure revealing layers of sediment and ancient trapped air bubbles. At the center of the plateau, Partially obscured by drifting snow and a thin veil of frost, lay a structure that defied all conventional expectations. A massive, ice-encased object that seemed both alien and inexplicably ancient. Dr. Falk motioned for silence as they approached the object with a careful reverence. The craft was unlike any terrestrial technology known to man. Its shape was asymmetrical and organic, resembling neither the streamlined designs of modern aircraft nor the angular constructs of military hardware. Instead, it appeared as a chaotic mass of curves and angles, as though it had been grown rather than built. Embedded in layers of ancient ice, the craft's surface was pitted and cracked, its contours softened by millennia of exposure to the relentless Antarctic elements. Astrid knelt beside the structure, her gloved hands hovering over the surface as she adjusted the focus on her handheld thermal imager. "There's something not right about the heat signature," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. "It's not uniform like the rest of the ice. There are pockets of warmth here and there, as if something inside is generating heat from within." Her voice was measured but laced with an intensity that hinted at her growing unease. The team quickly established a temporary perimeter around the aircraft, their breaths visible in the frigid air as they set up additional instruments. A hush fell over the group, punctuated only by the soft hum of equipment and the distant groan of shifting ice. In that charged silence, every member of the team felt the weight of the unknown bearing down upon them. After careful deliberation, Dr. Falk ordered the drilling team to begin coring into the object's icy sheath. As the drill bit into the hardened surface, a cascade of fine ice particles was dislodged, swirling into the air like a ghostly snowfall. The vibrations from the drilling reverberated through the ice, as though the ancient craft itself were stirring from a long, frozen slumber. Minutes stretched into an eternity as the drill progressed slowly through the thick barrier of ice. Every rotation of the drill was met with an anxious silence from the onlookers, their eyes fixed on the evolving borehole. Then, with a low, resonant crack, the drill broke through to reveal a cavernous interior bathed in an eerie, otherworldly glow. The interior of the spacecraft was a spectacle of impossible geometry and surreal luminescence. The walls, though partially obscured by remnants of ice, were smooth and metallic, untouched by the ravages of time or the elements. The structure was vast, the dimensions defying any familiar human scale. In the center of the chamber, embedded within a lattice of frost and crystalline formations, lay a life form that was both mesmerizing and deeply unsettling. It was as if the creature had been preserved in a state of suspended animation for countless eons. Its form was amorphous, composed of an undulating mass that shifted and pulsed as if alive. Translucent membranes wove themselves around clusters of what appeared to be bioluminescent organs, their soft internal light casting ghostly reflections on the smooth metallic surfaces around them. The creature was neither clearly biological nor mechanical. It seemed to straddle the realms of organic life and something entirely beyond human comprehension. "By the gods," whispered Tobias, one of the junior researchers, his voice barely audible as he stepped closer to peer at the alien form. It's like nothing I've ever seen." Dr. Falk's eyes narrowed as he regarded the creature with a mixture of awe and trepidation. "Document everything," he ordered. "Astrid, take thermal and spectral readings. Tobias, record high-resolution images. I want every detail logged." His tone left no room for argument. This was a discovery that could redefine their understanding of life and the cosmos. Astrid's fingers danced over the controls of her portable scanner. The data streamed onto her tablet in real time, creating a tapestry of readings that painted an increasingly complex picture of the creature's structure. "The organism's biochemistry is unlike any terrestrial life," she observed, her voice hushed. "It appears to be composed of a compound that we can't match to any known elements or organic structures. Its energy output is anomalously high, and there are fluctuations in its metabolic signals that are almost rhythmic." The revelation sent a ripple of excitement through the group, tempered by the silent acknowledgement of the inherent danger. For all its mesmerizing beauty, the creature exuded an aura of latent threat, an energy that was both alluring and ominous. Dr. Falk's hands clenched slightly as he regarded the creature, his mind racing with possibilities and potential consequences. "This isn't just an archaeological find," he murmured. "This is evidence of something far more significant, perhaps even extraterrestrial in origin." As the team continued to work, a careful balance of scientific inquiry and respectful caution prevailed. They were breaking new ground, both literally and figuratively, and every observation was laden with the possibility of reshaping scientific paradigms. The once pristine silence of the Antarctic was now punctuated by the quiet, methodical hum of instruments and the soft murmur of voices absorbed in the gravity of the moment. At one point, Astrid paused as the creature's subtle, almost imperceptible pulsations caught her eye. "Do you see that?" she asked, indicating the gentle rise and fall of the organism's form. "It's as if it's breathing." Her words hung in the air, heavy with both wonder and apprehension. But what does it breathe? And why would a creature like this be dormant for so long, preserved in ice? Tobias, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination, responded. Could it be that the craft and the creature are part of the ethane system? Like a living archive or a vessel that was meant to carry something, or someone. His tone carried a note of incredulity, as if the very notion of an interstellar message encoded in ice was too fantastical to be believed, yet the evidence before them was irrefutable. Dr. Falk stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the creature's slowly undulating form. We must be extremely cautious, he advised. We have no idea how it might react to our presence. This could be a dormant entity waiting for the right trigger, a trigger we might inadvertently provide. His warning resonated with the team, underscoring the precarious balance between scientific curiosity and the potential for catastrophe. As the day wore on, the team set up a temporary observation station within the cavernous interior of the spacecraft. They carefully positioned sensors around the creature, monitoring its every movement and fluctuation. Every so often, Astrid would lean in close, her eyes scanning the data with an intensity born of both passion and concern. These are patterns in its activity, she noticed softly, as if it's communicating or reacting to something. But what? Is it aware of us, or is it simply following an internal cycle? The air in the chamber was charged with an almost tangible energy, a mixture of the chill that permeated every surface and the subtle pulsating warmth radiating from the creature itself. The interplay of shadows and light on the alien walls evoked images of ancient rituals and cosmic ceremonies, a reminder that this discovery was not just an accident of nature, but perhaps a carefully orchestrated relic of a long-forgotten civilization. In one particularly tense moment, as the sensors recorded a sudden spike in the creature's metabolic readings, Tobias whispered, "It's reacting, as if something has disturbed it." His voice was barely audible, yet the urgency in his tone cut through the ambient quiet like a knife. Dr. Falk exchanged a grave look with Astrid before replying, "Let's not jump to conclusions. It might be a natural response to our presence. Continue monitoring closely and be prepared for any changes." Hours passed in a slow, measured cadence as the team documented every nuance of the discovery. The creature, for all its enigmatic beauty, remained motionless for long periods, interspersed with brief, almost languid movements that hinted at a life that had lain dormant for eons. The alien spacecraft around it was a marvel in its own right, a relic whose origin, design, and purpose defied the boundaries of conventional human technology. Every detail was recorded, every observation meticulously noted. The scientists' initial apprehension was slowly giving way to a tempered awe, even as the shadows of uncertainty loomed large. As twilight approached once more, casting the cavern in a gentle, diffused glow, the team gathered to review the data they had collected. The mood was one of cautious triumph. They had unearthed something truly unprecedented, yet the implications of their discovery were as vast as the frozen wastes outside. Astrid's voice, soft but resolute, broke the silence. "We've documented a system unlike anything on Earth. The biochemistry, the structural integrity of the craft. It's as if we're looking at a living testament to a civilization that existed long before humanity ever dreamt of the stars." Dr. Falk added, "This discovery forces us to confront questions we've long avoided. Who built this? What purpose does it serve? And perhaps most importantly, why has it been hidden away in the ice for so long?" His words were more rhetorical than sinking answers, yet they resonated deeply with everyone present. A moment of reflective silence followed, during which each team member seemed to wrestle with the enormity of their find. The interplay of scientific wonder and latent dread was palpable. Here, in the depths of an alien craft locked away in a glacier, lay the possibility of knowledge that could reshape their understanding of life itself, and with it, the potential for consequences they could scarcely imagine. In a whispered exchange near one of the sensor consoles, Tobias remarked, "I can't help but wonder if this is a warning, or maybe an invitation. Something left behind, waiting for us to decipher its message." His words, half in wonder and half in apprehension, were met with a mix of nods and silent acknowledgement from the others. As the night deepened outside, the team reluctantly began to prepare for the return to the outpost. The creature remained undisturbed, its presence an eerie counterpoint to the soft hum of the instruments and the measured rhythm of their departure. Dr. Falk, however, lingered a moment longer, his eyes fixed on the alien form as if seeking answers in its inscrutable depths. "We have to be careful with what we do next," he murmured. "We've crossed a threshold here. The rules of nature as we understand them may not apply in this place." With a final, lingering glance, the team secured the temporary observation station and began their cautious retreat, their footsteps echoing in the vast, silent chamber. The journey back through the labyrinth of ice and shadow was marked by a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Every creak and whisper of wind seemed to carry the weight of the unknown, a reminder that the discovery they had made was not merely an object of study, but a harbinger of mysteries yet to unfold. Back at the outpost, in the warmth of their makeshift laboratory, the researchers convened to compile the day's findings. The data, images, and spectral readings were laid out like pieces of a cosmic puzzle, each fragment hinting at a larger, unfathomable picture. Astrid carefully reviewed the thermal maps while Tobias cross-referenced the sensor data with the visual records. Dr. Falk observed them both, his expression etched with both pride and concern. "In all my years of exploration," Dr. Falk said quietly, "I've never encountered anything that challenges the very fabric of our understanding of life. Today, we've opened a door to a realm that defies logic. We must proceed with both scientific rigor and the utmost caution." The mood in the room was somber yet resolute. Every researcher felt the weight of their responsibility, not just to science, but to the world beyond this frozen frontier. The alien spacecraft and its mysterious occupant were not just relics of a bygone era. They were symbols of the vast unknown that lay beyond the confines of human knowledge, beckoning them to explore further even as they warned of the dangers of covering too deep. Over the ensuing hours, discussions unfolded in hushed, urgent tones. Plans were drawn up for further investigation, and contingencies were debated in the case the creature exhibited any signs of threat. Despite the marvel of their discovery, the team was united in the understanding that what they had found was as perilous as it was groundbreaking. By the time the first hints of a new day filtered through the polar darkness, the Nordic team had reached a tentative consensus. The alien craft and its preserved occupant needed to be studied in situ for as long as possible before any attempt was made to transport them. The risks, though formidable, were outweighed by the promise of unprecedented scientific insight, and perhaps an understanding of a legacy left behind by beings from beyond the stars. As the team prepared for another day of careful observations and analysis, the chamber where the craft lay dormant became a silent witness to the collision of human curiosity and cosmic mystery. Every measured breath, every cautious step, resonated with the gravity of the discovery. The alien presence, frozen yet somehow pulsing with life, continued its enigmatic cycle, a slow, rhythmic dance that defied explanation and beckoned the researchers to explore deeper. In the quiet moments before the next expedition, Dr. Falk lingered once more by the observation window that looked into the cavern. The interplay of light and shadow upon the alien craft evoked images of a long-lost civilization and ancient truths, a reminder that the universe was vast, mysterious, and filled with wonders that transcended the limits of human imagination. "We stand on the brink of something monumental," he thought silently. "Whatever secrets this craft holds, they may as well change our understanding of existence itself." Thus, as the Antarctic wind began to stir the frozen silence outside the outpost, the Nordic research team braced themselves for the challenges ahead. With the alien spacecraft as both muse and enigma, they were poised to explore deeper into the mysteries of the unknown, a journey that promised not only to expand the frontiers of science, but also to confront the very nature of what it means to be alive in a universe where the boundaries between the known and the unimaginable blur into the cold, endless night. Chapter 3. The Extraction. The long, unyielding winter of Antarctica had become a crucible in which every decision was measured in heartbeats and every step carried the weight of fate. After days of careful observation and the recording of every nuance around the alien spacecraft, the Nordic research team reached a turning point. It was clear that the significance of the discovery far outweighed the possibility of leaving it untouched on the ice. Thus, after much debate and measured deliberation, the decision was made. The alien entity, both the mysterious craft and its enigmatic occupant, would be transported to a more secure facility at Glacier Point Station. Dr. Henrik Falk, whose steady leadership had guided the team through the initial phase of the investigation, convened an emergency meeting in the dimly lit conference room of the outpost. The walls, once adorned with weathered maps and sensor readouts, now bore the weight of a decision that could alter the course of their research, and possibly the course of history. Every face in the room was etched with both determination and apprehension. "We have witnessed something unprecedented," Dr. Falk began, his voice echoing softly in the cold room. "The data, the images, and the subtle pulses of the creature's life signals all point to an origin beyond anything we have encountered. But as much as our scientific curiosity drives us, we must also be pragmatic. The risk of leaving it here, exposed to the elements and vulnerable to further unknown interactions with the surrounding ice, are too high." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "Our instruments have recorded fluctuations that suggest the entity is not entirely dormant. There was a measurable energy output that could escalate if the environmental conditions change. We are dealing with something that may not remain inert under prolonged exposure to variable temperatures or additional stress. For our own safety and for the integrity of our research, we must transport it to Glacier Point Station, where containment protocols and advanced facilities will allow us to study it more comprehensively." A heavy silence settled over the room as the team digested the gravity of the decision. Astrid Nygaard, her eyes reflecting the cool blue glow of her portable scanner, spoke up with measured caution. "Henrik, I understand the urgency, but we must consider that the process of extraction itself might trigger reaction from the entity. We have seen indications that it responds to external stimuli, a shift in temperature, a disturbance in its immediate environment. Transporting it could inadvertently activate something we are not prepared for. Dr. Falk nodded gravely. That risk exists, Astrid, but we have no choice. The outpost here is not equipped to handle a full-scale analysis of an extraterrestrial organism. Glacier Point Station's containment facilities are designed for hazardous material, and while nothing can fully anticipate this situation, it is our best option. We must take the risk with calculated steps. In the midst of this tense exchange, a knock sounded at the door. Entering the room was a new face, a tall, confident woman with a scholarly air about her. Her name was Emily Shaw, an American paleontologist whose expertise in ancient life forms and unusual biochemical signatures had earned her reputation as one of the foremost experts in her field. She had been recruited specifically for her ability to analyze biological specimens of ambiguous origin, and her arrival marked a turning point in the team's outlook. "Good morning," Emily said, her voice calm but assertive as she surveyed the room and the data laid out before her. "I've been following your progress remotely, and I must say, this discovery is unlike anything I have encountered. The organism's preservation state, combined with its anomalous heat signatures and biochemical markers, suggests that it is not only extraterrestrial but may also contain genetic elements that could redefine our understanding of life itself." Dr. Falk introduced her to the team, emphasizing her critical role. "Emily, your insights will be invaluable as we plan the extraction and subsequent analysis. We need to transport the entity under conditions that minimize the risk of triggering any adverse reactions. Your expertise will help guide our containment procedures." Emily nodded, her gaze fixed on a series of spectral images displayed on one of the monitors. "I reviewed the data you sent. The organism is astonishing in its complexity and seems to exist in a state of suspended animation, preserved in the ice as though time itself had chosen to stand still. However, my concern is that the extraction process may disturb this delicate balance. The act of warming or mechanically agitating the specimen could cause it to awaken or react in unforeseen ways." The conversation continued, rich with technical details and cautious optimism. Plans were meticulously drawn up, outlining every step of the extraction process. The team agreed that the operation would require a series of coordinated maneuvers. The alien spacecraft, still embedded in the thick, ancient ice, would be carefully isolated, and a controlled segment of the ice block containing the entity would be extracted. This block would then be placed in a specially designed containment unit, one capable of maintaining a stable, low-temperature environment and equipped with sensors to monitor any changes in the organism's behavior. With the decision to transport confirmed and the plan set into motion, the team began preparing for one of the most challenging operations of their careers. The extraction process was not merely an act of scientific retrieval. It was a delicate dance with the unknown, a venture into territory where every movement could tip the scales between preservation and catastrophe. The early hours of the following morning were marked by an almost tangible tension as the team mobilized outside the outpost. The Antarctic winds were merciless, lashing against exposed skin and howling through crevasses with an unyielding fury. In the pre-dawn gloom, a fleet of specialized transport vehicles, modified to withstand the brutal cold, was arranged in a careful formation. Their purpose was singular: to carry the extracted ice block containing the alien entity to Glacier Point Station, a secure facility many miles away from the isolation of the outpost. Emily, clad in heavy insulated gear and a fur-lined parka, joined the Nordic team as they reassembled around the extraction sites. The alien craft, now partially freed from its icy tomb by hours of painstaking drilling and coring, loomed in the weak light, a surreal monument to both ancient mystery and modern ambition. The block of ice designated for extraction was carefully demarcated, and the team double-checked every measurement, every temperature reading, and every seal on the containment unit. The weight of the operation was palpable in every deliberate movement and every measured command. Dr. Falk directed the crew with a blend of calm authority and a hint of trepidation. "Remember, we're not just transporting a relic. We're moving a living, or at least potentially living, entity. Treat the specimen with the utmost care. Any sudden jolt or temperature fluctuation could be disastrous." Astrid adjusted her goggles as she monitored the portable thermal sensors, her fingers flying over the controls of her rugged tablet. "I'm tracking a slight uptick in the energy output from within the ice. It's still within safe parameters, but we need to be ready for any unexpected changes. We must keep the temperature constant and minimize vibrations during transport." The team loaded the specially designed containment unit onto a low-slung, all-terrain vehicle engineered for the hostile Antarctic environment. The vehicle's engine rumbled to life, a defiant sound against the backdrop of endless ice and sky. The unit itself was a marvel of engineering, insulated to the highest standards and fitted with an array of sensors that would continuously monitor the specimen's condition. Secured inside was the ice block, still shimmering with the soft internal glow of the alien organism. As the convoy began its slow, deliberate journey across the frozen expanse, the harsh Antarctic environment reasserted its dominance. The road ahead was not a paved surface, but a treacherous landscape of undulating ice fields, hidden crevasses, and unpredictable weather. The vehicle's tracks churned the snow into frothy plumes, and the frigid air stung every exposed inch of skin. Yet the team pressed on, driven by the dual imperatives of scientific discovery and the need for secure containment. Emily sat in the co-pilot's seat, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon and the digital readouts before her. "The route we're taking is the most direct, but it's also the most exposed," she remarked in a low voice, half to herself and half to the attentive driver. "We need to anticipate that the creature's containment may begin to falter as we face variable temperatures from the jostling of the terrain." Her words underscored the ever-present uncertainty that accompanied the extraction. Every bump, every gust of wind had the potential to disturb the delicate equilibrium that held the alien organism in its state of suspended animation. Astrid's voice came over the radio, calm but insistent. "All systems are functioning within acceptable parameters for now. I'm monitoring the temperature inside the unit continuously. However, we are approaching an area known for sudden microclimatic shifts. Please be advised to reduce speed and minimize any abrupt maneuvers." The journey was a test of endurance and precision. The convoy navigated around towering icebergs and through narrow passes where the biting wind whipped at the vehicles. Dr. Falk sat in the lead, his eyes fixed on the road ahead and his mind weighing the potential implications of every decision. The atmosphere inside the vehicle was thick with both anticipation and an unspoken anxiety. Each member of the team was acutely aware that the alien entity, preserved in ice for countless years, might now be subjected to forces that could awaken its latent properties. For hours, the convoy advanced, the rhythmic crunch of tires on ice accompanied by the low hum of the vehicle's engine. The isolation of the Antarctic landscape was both magnificent and menacing, a vast, unending wilderness that offered no refuge from the elements. The team conversed in quiet tones, sharing observations and cautious predictions about what might lie ahead. Occasionally, a sharp jolt or an unexpected vibration would prompt an immediate check of the containment sensors, and Astrid's steady voice would confirm that all was still within the safe range. As the convoy crested a ridge overlooking a frozen valley, a brief moment of reprieve seemed to offer a glimpse of calm. The valley below was a pristine tableau of white and blue, the ice reflecting the weak light of a low-hanging sun. Yet even in this deceptive stillness, Emily's intuition was not easily placated. "There's something off about the valley," she observed quietly, her eyes narrowing as she studied the patterns in the ice. The formations seemed too regular, too engineered in appearance. It's almost as if nature itself had been altered. Dr. Falk glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "Engineered by what, Emily? It's hard to say with certainty, but sometimes the natural world surprises us with its own order. Stay alert, though. If our sensors detect any further anomalies, we'll need to adjust our course immediately." The journey resumed with a renewed sense of caution. The road grew more treacherous, and the vehicle's progress was punctuated by careful stops to check instruments and resecure the containment unit. With every pause, the team reviewed the data streaming in from the sensors, seeking any sign that the creature might be reacting to the journey. Yet, for the most part, the readings remained steady, the alien entity preserved in a frigid stasis that belied its extraordinary nature. However, as the convoy approached a narrow stretch of ice that bordered a deep crevasse, a subtle but unmistakable shift occurred. Astrid's scanner began to register minute fluctuations, a rise in thermal readings and a slight rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the creature itself. "I'm seeing a small increase in the internal energy," she announced, her voice tight with concern. "It's still within limits, but we're entering an area where the environmental conditions are changing rapidly. We may be nearing a threshold." The driver eased the vehicle's speed to a crawl as they navigated the precarious path, every jolt and vibration amplified by the sensitive instruments inside the containment unit. Emily's eyes remained fixed on the readouts, her mind racing with the implications. "If the creature's containment is compromised, even slightly, it could alter its state," she said softly. "We need to be prepared for a rapid response. This isn't just a scientific anomaly anymore. It could be a matter of survival." For what felt like an eternity, the convoy inched forward, the vehicle's engine straining against the icy resistance of the narrow passage. Every member of the team held their breath as they monitored the creature's condition, aware that the slightest deviation might herald unforeseen consequences. Finally, after a tense and nerve-wracking passage, the vehicle emerged onto a broader, albeit still unforgiving, expanse of ice. The immediate danger had passed, but the uneasy feeling of vulnerability lingered in every heartbeat. As the journey continued toward Glacier Point Station, the team took turns maintaining a constant vigil on the containment sensors. The ice-covered landscape, with its deceptive expanses of calm and sudden bursts of turbulence, served as a constant reminder that they were but fragile travelers in a vast, indifferent wilderness. The extraction had been successful in isolating the alien entity from its natural environment, but the challenges of transport had only just begun. Dr. Falk reviewed the data once more, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We must not underestimate the significance of these fluctuations," he cautioned. They may be subtle now, but even a small change in the internal conditions could indicate that the creature is more reactive than we anticipated. Our priority must be to reach Glacier Point Station with the specimen intact and undisturbed. Astrid's steady tone over the radio provided reassurance. All systems are holding steady for the moment. I'm adjusting the installation parameters to compensate for the temperature variations we're encountering. Let's hope that the unit's design can mitigate these emerging issues until we reach a more controlled environment. Emily, whose mind had been racing since the extraction began, finally spoke up with a measured resolve. We're in uncharted territory here. The creature's behavior suggests that it's not merely an inert biological relic. It might possess a form of responsiveness, perhaps even a rudimentary awareness. If that's the case, every movement we make, every change in temperature, every vibration, could be perceived as a stimulus. We must prepare for the possibility that it might not remain passive during transport. The conversation was punctuated by moments of heavy silence as the vehicle traversed yet another stretch of unpredictable terrain. The Antarctic environment was relentless, and the extraction's success hinged on the delicate balance between technology and nature. With each passing hour, the distance to Glacier Point Station increased, and with it, the team's collective apprehension grew. As dusk began to settle over the vast expanse of ice once again, the convoy's progress was finally marked by the distant silhouette of Glacier Point Station against the darkening sky. The secure facility, a beacon of technological advancement amidst the harsh isolation of Antarctica, promised the controlled environment that the alien entity so desperately needed. The vehicle rolled to a careful stop at the station's loading bay, where engineers and scientists awaited the arrival of this unprecedented specimen. In the final moments of the journey, as the containment unit was offloaded and transferred to the station's specialized transport chamber, a deep sense of both relief and lingering unease filled the air. Dr. Falk, Emily, Astrid, and the rest of the team exchanged glances that spoke of shared burdens and the knowledge that the true challenge was only beginning. The extraction had been successful, but the uncertainties about the alien creature's true nature and the potential consequences of its awakening remained as vast and inscrutable as the Antarctic expanse itself. As the containment unit was secured inside the controlled environment of Glacier Point Station, Emily took a moment to review the data on a portable monitor. Her eyes lingered on the fluctuating readings, the soft rhythmic pulse of the alien organism, a constant reminder of the unknown depths that lay within its frozen prison. "We did it," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. "But I have a feeling that this is only the beginning. Whatever this creature is, it's already begun to tell us its story, and it might not be a story we are prepared to hear." Dr. Falk's voice, measured and resolute, cut through the murmurs of the gathered scientists. "We have taken the first step in a long journey of discovery. Now that the entity is secured here at Glacier Point Station, we can begin to study it in the controlled conditions it demands. Let us proceed with caution, respect, and the unwavering pursuit of knowledge, for the secrets it holds may well redefine everything we understand about life." And so, as the night deepened outside the fortified walls of Glacier Point Station, the team prepared to embark on the next phase of their research. The extraction had been a triumph of human ingenuity in the face of nature's indifference. Yet it had also revealed the precarious balance between curiosity and caution. The journey through the hostile Antarctic environment had exposed vulnerabilities in the containment of the alien entity, subtle hints that its slumber might be disturbed by even the gentlest perturbations. In the controlled corridors of the station's research wing, as scientists began their preliminary analyses, an undercurrent of unease persisted. The creature, preserved in ice yet exhibiting faint signs of responsiveness, seemed to be a living enigma, a relic of a civilization that defied the boundaries of time and space. Its silent pulse, recorded meticulously by Astrid's sensors and interpreted with care by Emily's expert analysis, suggested that there was more to this organism than met the eye. It was as if the extraction had not only moved the creature physically from one location to another, but had also shifted the equilibrium of its existence, setting in motion forces that might eventually demand an answer. In the days that followed, as the containment unit rested in the secure confines of Glacier Point Station's lab, the researchers gathered for a series of detailed briefings. They discussed protocols, contingency plans, and the implications of an organism that seemed to straddle the line between inert matter and dynamic life. Every observation was weighed against the backdrop of countless uncertainties, a future in which the creature might awaken in ways that could challenge not only scientific theories, but also the foundations of human understanding. For now, though, the extraction had been completed. The transport had been a success, and the alien entity, ensconced in its icy cocoon, was safely housed in an environment designed to preserve it. The journey had been fraught with tension and subtle hints of emerging issues, and as each member of the team settled into their roles at Glacier Point Station, the memory of that perilous trek through the hostile Antarctic wilderness remained etched in their minds. It was a reminder of the fragility of human endeavor in the face of the cosmos' vast, indifferent forces. In the quiet hum of the station's laboratories, amid the soft beeps of monitoring equipment and the measured cadence of scientific inquiry, a new chapter of exploration was about to begin. The extraction had not been the end of their mission, but rather the threshold of a journey into realms where the boundaries of science, mythology, and the very nature of existence would be redefined. With every sensor reading and every careful observation, the team prepared to unravel the mysteries of the alien entity, mysteries that, in time, might reveal the secrets of a universe far more expansive and enigmatic than they had ever dared to imagine. Thus, as the containment unit settled into its new home at Glacier Point Station, and the team gathered to chart the next phase of their investigation, there was an unspoken understanding that the extraction was only the beginning. The alien creature, with its silent rhythmic pulse and its enigmatic presence, had already begun to challenge the conventions of science and beckon them towards truths that lay hidden in the folds of time and ice. Dr. Falk's final words resonated as a solemn promise. "We stand on the edge of a discovery that may change everything we know. Let us proceed with caution, with respect for the unknown, and with the unwavering dedication to uncover the truth behind this mystery." And with that, the chapter of extraction was closed, its success marking the opening of a new era of inquiry, as the journey into the heart of the unknown continued beneath the icy veneer of Antarctica. Part 2. The Outbreak. Chapter 4. A New Home, a New Threat. The approach to Glacier Point Station was like a descent into another realm, a realm where isolation and claustrophobia reigned in every corridor, every narrow passageway echoed with the secrets of the frozen wasteland outside. The station, an imposing complex of steel and reinforced concrete, was embedded in the heart of an unforgiving Antarctic plateau. Its exterior, battered by relentless winds and ice storms, betrayed little of the controlled chaos within. As the transport convoy rolled into the station's secure perimeter, the research team could not help but feel that they were stepping into a world apart from nature, a place where human ambition and survival coexisted in a perpetual struggle against the elements. The main entrance to Glacier Point Station was a heavy, airlock-style door that opened onto a long, dimly lit corridor. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their pale glow reflecting off polished metal walls and the thin layer of frost that had managed to settle in every crevice. The interior was designed for function over comfort, narrow passageways, low ceilings, and a pervasive sense of confinement. Every step echoed loudly in the sterile environment, emphasizing the isolation that had defined the station since its establishment. Here, the researchers would finally have the controlled conditions needed to study the alien entity in detail. Dr. Henrik Falk led the way, his every movement deliberate and measured as he guided the team deeper into the station. At his side, Astrid Nygaard reviewed data on a rugged tablet, her eyes flicking between the readouts and the environment around her. It was not long before they encountered the first of the additional key figures who would shape the next phase of their mission. In a small antechamber adjacent to the central corridor, a man in a weathered leather jacket and a fur-lined cap was engaged in a quiet conversation with the technician. He had the easy confidence of someone who had flown countless missions in harsh conditions. This was Ethan Hayes, the helicopter pilot whose reputation for calm under pressure had made him indispensable in the unforgiving environment of Antarctica. His eyes, a steely blue that seemed to mirror the icy expanse outside, met Dr. Falk's as he offered a curt nod of acknowledgement. "Welcome to Glacier Point," Ethan said, his voice low and measured. "I trust the journey wasn't too bad?" Dr. Falk replied with a slight smile. "It had its challenges, but we managed. I appreciate you meeting us here on such short notice." Ethan Hayes extended a hand, and in that brief handshake, the weight of their shared responsibility was evident, a mutual understanding that what lay ahead was fraught with uncertainties beyond the natural hazards of the Antarctic. Before the team could move deeper into the station, they were introduced to another key player in the unfolding drama. In a cramped office cluttered with technical manuals and stacks of research reports, Dr. Malcolm Weiss was poring over a series of charts and schematics. His features, defined by years of rigorous academic pursuit, were marked by keen intensity. Dr. Weiss was a scientist renowned for his work in xenobiology and astrophysics, and his reputation for unearthing unexpected connections between disparate phenomena had earned him a place on this mission. He looked up as the door swung open. "Dr. Falk? Astrid?" he greeted, his voice resonating with intellectual authority. "I've been briefed on your findings. I'm eager to see the data firsthand and understand how this specimen fits into our broader picture of extraterrestrial life." As introductions continued, several supporting crew members gathered nearby, technicians, laboratory assistants, and security personnel, each playing a vital role in the station's operation. Their faces were etched with fatigue and determination. They had been on the front lines of polar research for years, well accustomed to the isolation and the constant hum of machinery that kept the station alive. Each new arrival seemed to absorb the palpable tension that pervaded the corridors of Glacier Point Station. Once inside the central command hub, a large windowless room lined with banks of computers and sensor monitors, the team gathered to review their situation. The room was filled with a low drone of electronics, and the air was cool and conditioned, a sharp contrast to the biting cold just beyond the walls. Here, amidst the flickering screens and data streams, the alien entity was to be examined in detail. The containment unit that had carried the mysterious life form from the Antarctic outpost now rested on a reinforced table in a secured section of the lab. Its surface was pristine, yet ominous, a frozen testament to the unfathomable origins of what it contained. Astrid, ever the diligent observer, began relaying the latest data. "The thermal readings remain consistent, but there's an irregular pulse that we've noted," she explained, her voice calm but edged with concern. "It seems to be a slow, rhythmic fluctuation. Not alarming on its own, but given the context, it's definitely unusual." Her words hung in the air, a subtle hint that the creature might not be as inert as it appeared. Dr. Malcolm Weiss stepped forward, leaning over the containment unit as if in silent conversation with the mysterious object encased within. "This organism," he said thoughtfully, "is unlike anything we've seen. Its structure defies conventional taxonomy, and its biochemical signatures hint at an origin that challenges our most basic assumptions about life. We must approach this with both scientific curiosity and extreme caution." His eyes, reflecting both awe and trepidation, never left the block of ice that held the alien form. As the team busied themselves with preliminary tests, scanning, recording, and analyzing every facet of the specimen, a collective experiment began to build. This was the moment they had all anticipated, the chance to witness and study a living piece of an extraterrestrial enigma. The air in the command hub seemed to vibrate with energy as each scientist offered their theories and speculations. It was a rare convergence of intellect and adventure, a moment when the promise of discovery overshadowed even the most deeply ingrained fears. Yet, as the initial excitement swelled, so too did an undercurrent of unease. It started with the softest of sounds, a barely perceptible hum that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the containment chamber. At first, it was dismissed as a whir of machinery or the hum of cooling systems. But then, in the quiet moments between scientific observations, the noise took on a different quality, a low, almost mournful resonance that could not be easily explained. Ethan Hayes, who had been standing by the viewport watching the shifting patterns of light outside, was the first to comment. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice unusually hushed. His eyes, which had been scanning the horizon beyond the thick glass, suddenly narrowed. "It's like the station itself is breathing." His comment, half in jest and half in earnest, sent a ripple of uncertainty through the group. Dr. Falk frowned as he listened, trying to discern the source of the sound amidst the cacophony of beeping monitors and the soft hum of the ventilation system. "I'm not convinced it's a malfunction," he said slowly. "It seems more organic, somehow." His remark was met with nods of agreement and uneasy glances, exchanged between team members. The notion that the very environment of Glacier Point Station might be reacting to the alien presence was as disconcerting as it was impossible to ignore. In a nearby observation room, Astrid and Dr. Weiss huddled over the latest sensor readings. The data, normally a steady stream of numbers and graphs, now revealed subtle anomalies, a series of spikes and dips that appeared in sync with the mysterious hum. "Look here," Astrid pointed at the monitor, her finger tracing the waveform. "Every 20 minutes or so, there's a brief surge, a kind of energy spike. It's almost as if the creature is trying to communicate or perhaps respond to something in its surroundings." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying a hint of apprehension beneath her scientific curiosity. Dr. Weiss leaned closer, his brow furrowing as he scrutinized the data. "Or it could be reacting to the station's energy fields," he mused. "The electromagnetic environment here is different from that of the open Antarctic. Perhaps the change in ambient energy is triggering a response in the specimen." His explanation, though plausible, did little to quell the growing sense of dread that was steadily building among the team. Meanwhile, in a secluded corner of the command hub, Ethan Hayes and a couple of security officers conducted a routine check of the station's external monitoring systems. The screens displayed a continuous loop of the harsh Antarctic landscape, a world of endless ice and swirling snow. Yet, amidst the static images, one of the officers paused, his eyes narrowing as he stared at a shadow that did not belong. "Sir, you need to see this," the officer said, pointing to a spot near the edge of the station's perimeter. On the monitor, a dark shape moved slowly against the backdrop of white. It was subtle, almost indistinguishable from the shifting shadows of a stormy sky. But it was there, a presence that defied explanation. Ethan Hayes adjusted the monitor's contrast, trying to get a better look. "That's odd," he remarked. "It must just be a trick of the light or a sensor glitch." But even as he said it, his tone betrayed an undercurrent of concern. The possibility that something beyond the expected was lurking just outside the safety of Glacier Point Station was not something he was inclined to dismiss. Back inside, the research team reconvened for another round of discussions. The containment unit, now the focal point of both scientific inquiry and quiet trepidation, sat at the center of the room like a frozen enigma. Dr. Falk addressed the assembled group, his voice carrying the weight of responsibility. "We have achieved an extraordinary milestone in our research. However, we must remain vigilant. The data indicates that our specimen is not entirely inert, and there are factors, both within the unit and in our surroundings, that suggest we are not alone in this endeavor. The room fell silent as his words sank in. Emily Shaw, who had been reviewing Ethan pools and running simulations on her laptop, looked up. "Are you suggesting that the creature is aware of our presence?" she asked softly. Her question, though tentative, resonated with everyone present. It was one thing to study an alien organism in a controlled environment, but quite another to consider the possibility that it might be conscious, or at the very least, responsive. Dr. Weiss responded, "We don't have definitive proof yet, but the patterns we're observing could indicate a form of rudimentary awareness. Whether that awareness is a survival mechanism or a form of communication remains to be determined." His words were measured, but the uncertainty in his tone was unmistakable. As the hours passed, the station's claustrophobic corridors and dimly lit laboratories became a microcosm of tension and anticipation. The initial excitement of the discovery was gradually giving way to an atmosphere of cautious dread. Every unexplained noise, every shifting shadow along the walls, seemed to hint at an unseen presence, an echo of the alien past that had intruded upon their carefully constructed sanctuary. In one particularly tense moment, as a heavy snowfall began to batter the exterior of the station, Astra was in the midst of recalibrating a sensor array when she noticed something unusual on her monitor. "There's a fluctuation in the thermal readings again," she said, her voice barely rising above a whisper. "It's localized right here, near the containment unit. It looks like something is generating heat, but it's not coming from the specimen itself." She pointed to a section of the display where a small shifting hotspot had emerged and then dissipated as quickly as it appeared. Dr. Falk moved closer to examine the data, his eyes scanning the screen with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Could it be a fault in the system?" he asked, though neither he nor anyone else seemed convinced by that possibility. "The heat signature is too irregular for it to be a simple technical glitch. We need to monitor this closely." The team agreed, and the sensor was set to record continuously, its output a silent testament to the ever-changing energy dynamics within the station. Outside, the wind howled with renewed intensity, and the snow battered the station's exterior with relentless fury. Ethan Hayes, ever vigilant, kept one eye on the external cameras and another on the weather conditions. "The storm is picking up," he remarked over the radio. "We should be prepared for possible interference with the station's systems." His warning, though routine in many ways, added another layer of tension to an already charged atmosphere. In the central command hub, discussions turned to contingency plans. Dr. Weiss proposed additional measures to isolate the containment unit from any external electromagnetic interference. "If the station's energy fields are affecting the specimen," he argued, "we must ensure that our experimental setup is as controlled as possible. This may require temporary relocation of the unit to a shielded chamber until we can better understand the anomalies." His suggestion was met with nods of agreement, and plans were swiftly made to retrofit a section of the laboratory with additional shielding. Emily Shaw, whose expertise in paleontology had provided invaluable insights into the specimen's possible evolutionary origins, remained unusually quiet during this technical discussion. Her eyes drifted back to the containment unit, as if trying to read the silent language of the alien organism. "I can't shake the feeling," she said softly, "that we're witnessing the beginning of something that we may not be ready to confront. This isn't just about science. It's about our place in the universe, and what happens when the boundaries of that universe start to blur." Her words, filled with both wonder and trepidation, underscored the profound implications of their discovery. As night deepened, the station's interior took on an almost surreal quality. The narrow hallways and cramped workspaces, already charged with tension, seemed to close in on the researchers. Shadows danced on the walls, cast by the flickering light of aging fixtures, and every creak and groan of the structure sent shivers down spines. The initial thrill of discovery was now tempered by a growing sense of vulnerability, a realization that the alien presence might have consequences beyond the realm of scientific inquiry. Late in the evening, as the storm raged outside and the team settled in for another long night of monitoring and analysis, an unexpected power fluctuation sent a ripple of alarm through the station. The lights flickered, and for a brief moment the hum of electronics faltered, plunging the corridor into a disorienting half-darkness. Ethan Hayes, who was stationed at the external control panel, immediately alerted the team. "We're experiencing a temporary power drop," he said, his tone measured but laced with concern. "I'm checking the backup systems now." The technician scrambled to ensure that all critical systems remained operational, and while the outage was quickly resolved, the incident left everyone on edge. In that charged atmosphere, the containment unit and its enigmatic occupant loomed as silent, inscrutable witnesses to the unfolding events. Every passing moment was a reminder that the creature was not merely a relic of the past, but a potential harbinger of future uncertainties. The station, with its claustrophobic interior and isolated corridors, had become a crucible in which the forces of science, nature, and the unknown converged. Dr. Falk, standing before the central monitor, addressed the assembled team with a quiet determination. We have come a long way from the frozen frontier, and today we have a new home for our discovery. But let us not be deceived by the apparent safety of these walls. The alien entity we have brought here is a challenge to everything we know, and we must be prepared for the possibility that it may not remain passive. Stay vigilant, document every anomaly, and remember that our quest for knowledge must be balanced by our commitment to caution. His words, though measured, carried the weight of the unknown and served as a solemn reminder of the stakes at hand. As the night wore on and the team retreated to their individual workstations, the station seemed to settle into an uneasy silence. Yet beneath that silence, a subtle undercurrent of energy pulsed, a rhythmic cadence that resonated through the corridors and into the hearts of those who dared to listen. It was as if the very walls of Glacier Point Station were alive, aware of the extraordinary presence they sheltered, and perhaps even complicit in the mysteries they were about to unravel. In the solitude of her laboratory, Astrid continued to analyze the sensor data, her eyes flickering between the readouts and the containment unit. Each spike, each dip in the energy levels was meticulously logged and scrutinized. The data suggested that the creature was indeed responsive to its environment, its subtle reactions hinting at a level of complexity that defied easy categorization. Astrid's mind raced with possibilities. Was the creature communicating, reacting to distress, or perhaps adapting to the new energy fields within the station? These questions, unanswered and unsettling, added another layer of complexity to an already labyrinthine situation. Meanwhile, Emily Shaw pored over ancient texts and scientific journals in a quiet corner of the library-like archive that formed part of the station's research wing. Determined to find any reference that might shed light on her mysterious organism before her, she cross-referenced data from the specimen with historical records and obscure mythologies of extraterrestrial life. Her search, though rigorous and methodical, did little to ease the disquiet that had taken root in her mind. Every piece of evidence seemed to point to a truth that was as magnificent as it was terrifying, a truth that challenged the very foundations of human understanding. By the early hours of the morning, as the storm outside finally began to wane and the first pale hints of dawn filtered through the narrow observation windows, the team gathered once more in the command hub. The mood was somber, laced with a shared sense of foreboding. The initial excitement of the discovery had given way to a sober awareness that the alien presence might herald not only scientific breakthroughs, but also unforeseen dangers. Dr. Falk, his face drawn and resolute, addressed the team one final time for the night. "We stand at the threshold of a new era in our research," he intoned. "Glacier Point Station is our sanctuary, our beacon in this frozen wilderness, and within these walls, we must confront both the marvels and the perils of what we have discovered. Rest now, but remain prepared. Tomorrow, we venture even deeper into the unknown." As the researchers dispersed to their quarters, the corridors of Glacier Point Station seemed to whisper with an almost sentient awareness. Every shadow, every flicker of light, carried with it the promise of mystery and the latent threat of something far beyond the scope of human control. In that moment, the station was not just a home for scientific inquiry. It was a crucible where the boundaries between the known and unimaginable blurred, and where every heartbeat echoed with the silent, relentless pulse of a new threat. The hours that followed were filled with restless dreams and uneasy awakenings. In the solitude of his small room, Ethan Hayes found himself haunted by the image of that dark shape moving against the ice, a presence that defied explanation and whispered of dangers yet unseen. Dr. Weiss, too, lay awake, his mind burdened with the implications of a creature that might one day define the containment protocols they had so carefully established. And Emily, in the quiet recesses of her thoughts, wrestled with the notion that the answers they sought might come at a price too high for any of them to bear. Thus, in the heart of Glacier Point Station, as the new day dawned over an Antarctic landscape that remained as indifferent as ever, the research team braced themselves for the challenges ahead. The alien entity, encapsulated in its frozen prison and accompanied by the mysterious hum that reverberated through the station's corridors, had already begun to unravel the delicate tapestry of uncertainty that had defined their mission. In every measured breath, in every cautious glance exchanged across the command hub, there lingered the unspoken truth that a new threat was emerging, one that would test the limits of their courage, their science, and their very humanity. And so, with the first light of dawn breaking through the narrow observation windows of Glacier Point Station, the stage was set for the next phase of their journey, a phase in which the boundaries of discovery and danger would merge, and the team would be forced to confront the reality that sometimes the greatest mysteries hide not only in the distant cosmos, but in the quiet, unyielding heart of isolation itself. Chapter 5. The First Contact. The station's laboratories had grown accustomed to an uneasy rhythm over the past few days, but nothing in the history of Glacier Point Station could have prepared the research team for the moment when the alien entity defied every expectation. The hours had passed in a steady cadence of measurements, guarded conversation, and the constant hum of the containment unit's sensors. Yet deep within the frozen heart of that block of ice, something stirred, a subtle shift that would soon shatter the fragile calm that had been so carefully maintained. It began with a faint tremor, an imperceptible vibration that rippled through the containment chamber late one stormy night. In the dim light of the laboratory, Astrid Nygaard was the first to notice the anomaly. She had been meticulously reviewing the continuous stream of thermal and electromagnetic readings when the numbers began to fluctuate in an irregular pattern. The steady pulse that had been recorded over the past few days had suddenly begun to spike and waver, as though something within the ice was trying to break free from its imposed stasis. Astrid's heart pounded in her chest as she adjusted the sensitivity of her instruments. "Dr. Falk," she called out in a hushed tone, "I'm detecting a sudden energy surge from within the containment unit. It's as if the specimen is reacting violently." Her voice trembled, not solely from the cold or exhaustion, but from the dawning realization that the creature was no longer content to remain a silent enigma. Dr. Henrik Falk, standing at the central console with his face illuminated by the pale glow of digital readouts, immediately moved to her side. "Show me the data," he demanded, his tone a mix of authoritative calm and barely concealed concern. Astrid pressed a few keys, and the monitors filled with a jagged waveform that pulsed erratically. In that moment, the familiar hum of the unit gave way to an irregular, almost guttural sound, a low rumble that resonated through the laboratory walls. Before anyone could fully comprehend the significance of the readings, the containment unit shuddered violently. A series of high-pitched cracks echoed as meticulously engineered seals began to fracture. Dr. Malcolm Weiss, who had been poring over ancient data and xenobiological theories on a nearby workstation, looked up in alarm. "What in the world?" he exclaimed, rising quickly from his chair. Within seconds, the shockwaves of the disturbance reverberated through the entire chamber. The alien entity, long immobilized in its icy tomb, now began to break free from the confines of its containment. The ice, once a pristine barrier, splintered apart as if protesting years of enforced dormancy. A violent shudder ran through the unit, sending shards of ice scattering in every direction. It was as though the creature had awakened with a vengeance, determined to reclaim its freedom from the clutches of human interference. A moment of indescribable horror swept over the assembled researchers as they stared in disbelief at the unfolding chaos. The creature's form, previously obscured by layers of ice, now emerged in a series of jagged angles and twisting shapes. Its surface, once dormant and cold, pulsed with a sickly luminescence that cast eerie shadows across the laboratory walls. It was not simply a life form preserved in time. It was a being with an inherent will, a force that defied containment. The first act of its rebellion was as horrifying as it was swift. With a force that seemed disproportionate to its fragile state, the creature hurled a massive shard of ice in a violent arc across the room. The projectile smashed through a reinforced window, shattering the protective glass into 1,000 glistening fragments. The shattering was deafening in the confined space, and the force of the impact sent a shockwave that rattled the very foundation of Glacier Point Station. Panic erupted in the command hub. Ethan Hayes, who had been monitoring external conditions from the adjacent control room, heard the explosion and immediately rushed toward the disturbance. His boots pounded against the corridor's metal grating as he sprinted to join his colleagues. "What the hell is happening?" he shouted over the comm system, his voice laced with urgency and disbelief. Inside the lab, chaos reigned. Dr. Falk barked orders, his authoritative voice attempting to restore order amid the pandemonium. "Everyone, get back! Secure the area! Lock down all access to the chamber!" His commands echoed through the corridors as researchers scrambled to retreat to safety. Astrid's hands shook as she tried to recalibrate the sensors, desperate to capture more data even as her mind reeled from the horror unfolding before her eyes. The creature's emergence had not only defied scientific expectations, but also shattered the trust that had gradually built among the team. In the moments that followed, as the creature continued to wriggle and contort within the open space of the shattered containment unit, the researchers found themselves gripped by a cocktail of disbelief, fear, and frantic urgency. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet the overriding need to understand this unprecedented threat held them in place. Dr. Weiss's voice cut through the cacophony of alarms and sounds. "Everyone, remain calm. We need to assess the situation immediately. If we can contain this phenomenon, we might still salvage critical data." His plea, though rational and measured, barely registered as the room descended into a frenzied scramble. The creature, now partially free of its icy prison, writhed with an unnatural fluidity that seemed to defy physics. Its form was a nightmarish amalgam of shifting matter, a living enigma that moved with an eerie, predatory grace. In one terrifying moment, a long, sinewy appendage shot out from the mass, lashing across the room with alarming speed. It struck one of the laboratory benches, sending scientific instruments and delicate glassware crashing to the floor. The sound of shattering porcelain and clattering metal punctuated the air, further intensifying the collective panic. Researchers dove for cover behind sturdy workstations, their eyes wide with terror as they attempted to distance themselves from the creature's unpredictable movements. Among the chaos, mistrust began to take root. Whispers of blame and suspicion spread like wildfire. Some members of the team, already shaken by the sudden loss of control, began casting furtive glances at one another. "Did you do something wrong?" one scientist hissed to another as they cowered behind a table. "Maybe it was the way we were handling it," another replied in a tremulous voice, his eyes darting nervously between his colleagues. In that charged atmosphere, the seed of mistrust was sown, a silent but potent acknowledgement that someone, somewhere, might have provoked this unholy awakening. Ethan Hayes, having reached the laboratory, assessed the situation with a mixture of professional detachment and personal horror. "I'm calling for immediate backup," he declared into his radio, his voice echoing with determination. "All available personnel, secure the area and initiate lockdown protocols. We cannot allow this creature to spread beyond this chamber." Yet even as he issued his orders, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Was it really the creature that had rebelled against containment? Or was there something more sinister at play? For a brief, harrowing moment, time seemed to slow as the creature surged forward with renewed vigor. The alien mass, now partially freed from the last vestiges of its containment, roared like a living tempest. Its surface shuddered with waves of unearthly energy, and the entire room was bathed in a sickly, pulsating glow that defied description. In that moment of primal terror, the creature unleashed its first truly horrifying act, a guttural, otherworldly screech that reverberated through the very walls of Glacier Point Station. The sound was not merely a noise, it was a declaration of defiance, a cry that seemed to echo from the farthest reaches of the cosmos. The intensity of the sound was such that it sent shockwaves through the bodies of everyone present. Some of the researchers instinctively clutched their ears, while others stumbled backward, overcome by an almost physical sense of dread. It was as if the creature's call was a summons to chaos, a rallying cry that dissolved the fragile boundaries between order and anarchy. As the creature's cry subsided, the room was left in a state of stunned silence. For several long, agonizing seconds, no one moved or spoke. The only sound was the ragged breathing of those who remained, a testament to the profound shock that had gripped them. Then, in a sudden surge of adrenaline, chaos resumed. Researchers scattered in all directions, desperately seeking safety in the labyrinthine corridors of Glacier Point Station. The sophisticated instruments that had once served as windows into the mysteries of the alien entity were now abandoned, their data streams left to flicker incoherently on shattered screens. In the midst of the panic, Astrid, still rooted to the spot by a mix of scientific fascination and terror, clutched her tablet as if it were a lifeline. I need to document this," she stammered, her voice barely audible over the din of hurried footsteps and frantic commands. "We can't let this be lost. Every detail counts." Her plea, though rational, seemed almost incongruous with the face of the overwhelming threat that had been unleashed. Yet even as she recorded the harrowing events, the underlying terror was unmistakable. This was not a mere scientific anomaly, but a living, malevolent force that had shattered their carefully constructed sanctuary. Dr. Falk, his face pale but resolute, moved swiftly to coordinate a response. "All personnel, retreat to the secure zones immediately," he ordered, his voice rising above the clamor. "We are not equipped to handle this situation in the open. I want containment teams at every exit. I want all data backups secured." His commands, though forceful, were tinged with desperation. The creature's presence had rendered the familiar terrain of Glacier Point Station a hostile and unpredictable battlefield. As the researchers hurriedly evacuated, Dr. Weiss remained behind, his mind racing to comprehend the impossible. "This is not just an escape," he muttered to himself, his eyes fixed on the undulating form of the creature. "It is as if it had been waiting for this moment, a moment where the boundaries between life and stasis finally crumble." His words, barely audible over the surrounding chaos, were a grim acknowledgement that the event was only the beginning of a cascade of horrors that might soon engulf them all. Amid the turmoil, mistrust began to poison the team's unity. Whispers of blame and furtive glances were exchanged as individuals retreated into isolated clusters. One researcher accused another in a near-hysterical outburst. "You knew this was dangerous! You insisted on every test, every measurement! Were you so eager to play God that you ignored the warning signs?" His voice, shaking with fury and terror, was answered by bitter retorts that echoed the ethane sentiment. That perhaps one among them had underestimated the power of the unknown. That perhaps human arrogance had provoked this cataclysm. In the dimly lit corridor outside the shattered containment chamber, Ethan Hayes tried to restore order over the comm system. "Listen up, everyone," he barked, his tone firm despite the turmoil. "I need you to maintain your positions. We're going to secure this wing and regroup in the safe zone. Do not engage the creature unless absolutely necessary." His words, intended to rally the team, were met with sporadic murmurs of agreement, voices filled with uncertainty and the weight of collective fear. The creature, meanwhile, continued its rampage with an almost otherworldly indifference. Its form twisted and convulsed as it moved deeper into the lab, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Equipment lay scattered like broken toys, and the very floor of the chamber was marred by deep gouges and fractures that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Every step the creature took seemed to defy the laws of physics, its motion both fluid and erratic, as if it were guided by forces beyond mortal understanding. In the ensuing chaos, a series of desperate attempts were made to re-establish control. Dr. Falk and Astrid, along with the few remaining technicians, huddled together in a makeshift command center near a sealed emergency exit. Their faces were etched with a mixture of determination and despair as they attempted to reconfigure the station's automated lockdown protocols. "We need to contain it," Astrid pleaded, her eyes darting between her tablet and the door behind which the creature's ominous presence could still be felt. "If we don't isolate the threat now, it'll spread beyond this wing, and then we'll lose control of the entire station." Dr. Falk's jaw tightened as he responded. "We must assume that this is only the first of its kind. We need to think logically, secure all exits, activate internal sensors, and send out a status report to headquarters. Every second counts." His voice was steady, even as his mind churned with the realization that their scientific pursuit had opened a door that might never be closed. As the minutes turned to what felt like an eternity, the station became a theater of frantic activity and rising paranoia. Communication lines crackled with panicked voices, and every corridor seemed to harbor both visible and unseen threats. Dr. Weiss, emerging from his isolation in the lab, joined the group with a grave expression. "I believe we must consider that the creature's emergence was not an accident," he said quietly. "There are too many anomalies, too many subtle triggers that hint at an intelligence behind this uprising. We need to consider the possibility that this event was orchestrated, or at least influenced, by factors within our own research protocols." His words added fuel to the burgeoning mistrust among the team. Accusations began to fly. Some argued that the extraction methods or the very presence of certain personnel had triggered the creature's violent reaction. Others suggested that the creature's behavior was a direct response to the station's electromagnetic fields or even the ambient energy produced by the station's own machinery. In the midst of these conflicting theories, the need for immediate action overshadowed any attempts at rational discourse. Yet, despite the chaos and the rising discord, a grim determination took hold. A small team of containment specialists, led by Ethan Hayes and supported by Dr. Falk, moved to re-establish a perimeter around the lab. With careful, deliberate movements, they deployed portable energy barriers and reinforced sealed doors in an attempt to corral the creature. Each step was fraught with danger, as the alien being continued to shift its form and elude capture, its every movement a reminder of the forces it embodied. In one heart-stopping moment, as the containment team advanced down a narrow corridor, a sudden burst of static electricity crackled along the metal walls. The creature's form, visible just beyond a reinforced door, flared with an intense, unearthly light. A loud, keening wail erupted from it, a sound that seemed to penetrate every fiber of the human soul. The team froze, their eyes locked on the spectacle of shifting light and shadow, while behind them, whispers of doubt and fear began to coalesce into an unspoken question. Could anyone truly control something that defied every law of nature? The ensuing moments were a blur of motion and emotion. As containment specialists scrambled to re-establish control, researchers in the command hub exchanged desperate glances, some pleading for answers while others silently mourned the loss of certainty. Every shattered piece of equipment, every fractured shard of ice on the floor, became a symbol of their collective vulnerability in the face of a threat that was as enigmatic as it was terrifying. In the end, as the station's corridors echoed with a cacophony of alarms and the anguished cries of its inhabitants, the creature managed to slip through the makeshift barriers, vanishing into a shadowed passageway. In its wake, it left a lingering silence. A silence filled with both awe and an ever-growing dread that this was only the first contact, the initial act of a chain reaction that would soon engulf them all. For hours afterward, the station was enveloped in a tense, fractured calm. Researchers gathered in clusters, some whispering theories, others offering silent prayers. The immediate horror of the creature's escape had given way to a pervasive sense of disbelief and fear. In whispered conversations, individuals recounted what they had seen and heard. The violent shattering of glass, the monstrous form contorting in the dim light, and that inhuman wail that had seemed to come from the very depths of the cosmos. Each retelling only deepened the mystery, then multiplied the terror. Mistrust, once a seedling, now sprouted into full-blown suspicion. Accusations were leveled in hushed tones, as researchers began to wonder if one among them had been responsible for some critical oversight that allowed the creature's emergence. "You were the one in charge of the final seal check," one voice accused, barely audible over the low murmur of the gathered group. "How could you let this happen?" another retorted, his tone bitter with anger. "Maybe it wasn't a mistake at all. Perhaps someone wanted this to happen." And so, as the station's inhabitants struggled to come to grips with the reality of the situation, the bonds of trust that had once united them began to fracture irreparably. In the command hub, Dr. Falk convened an emergency meeting. With a heavy heart and determined gaze, he addressed the assembled team. "This is not the time for finger-pointing," he implored, his voice resonant with the gravity of the situation. "We have a threat that we do not understand, a threat that has already proven capable of shattering our containment protocols and our sense of security. Our priority must be to restore order, secure the station, and determine the true nature of what we are dealing with. Only then can we begin to assign responsibility for this disaster." His words, though measured, fell upon ears that were already too raw with fear and suspicion. As the meeting disbanded, the team splintered into smaller groups. Some went to reinforce the station's outer perimeters, others to salvage data and equipment from the damaged lab, and a few remained behind to monitor the sensors in the hope that further signs of the creature might reveal its intentions. In the dim glow of emergency lights, the corridors of Glacier Point Station became a labyrinth of shadow and uncertainty, a physical manifestation of the internal turmoil that now threatened to consume them all. In the midst of the chaos, Emily Shaw, who had observed the unfolding events with a mixture of horror and fascination, retreated to a quiet corner of the station's library. Surrounded by ancient texts and records of past expeditions, she sought solace in the knowledge that perhaps history held clues to understanding the alien presence. Yet even as she pored over the fragile pages of dusty manuscripts, the memory of the creature's emergence gnawed at her. The images of shattered glass, writhing forms, and that unearthly cry were indelibly imprinted on her mind, a constant reminder that humanity's reach had extended into realms best left unexplored. As the hours dragged on, the station's atmosphere became almost suffocating, a dense mixture of fear, suspicion, and the desperate hope that a solution might yet be found. The creature, though it had vanished into the labyrinthine passages of Glacier Point Station, had left behind an unmistakable legacy, the irrevocable shattering of the illusion of control. Every mind present knew that the creature's first act was not a random occurrence, but a deliberate statement of its existence, a harbinger of chaos that would upend everything they believed about the natural order. In the final moments of that long, agonizing night, as the storm outside subsided into a bitter, unrelenting drizzle, the researchers gathered one last time in the command hub. Faces drawn and eyes haunted by the events they had witnessed, they stared at the flickering screens and darkened corridors beyond. In the charged silence that followed, Dr. Falk spoke once more, his voice heavy with both determination and resignation. "This is only the beginning. The creature has made its first contact, and we've been forced to confront a reality that none of us were prepared for. We must now work together to contain this threat, to understand its nature, and to restore some semblance of order to our lives. Only then can we hope to rebuild what has been broken." His words, though measured and resolute, carried with them the weight of inevitability. As the first pale light of dawn crept through the narrow observation windows of Glacier Point Station, the research team stood on the precipice of a new, terrifying chapter. A chapter in which the boundaries between science and the unknown, between human ambition and cosmic indifference, would be irrevocably blurred. And as the station slowly began to stir back to life, every researcher knew that the memory of that first horrifying act, the creature's emergence and the subsequent cascade of panic and mistrust, would haunt them for as long as they lived. In the days that followed, as Glacier Point Station struggled to regain its footing in the aftermath of the creature's breakout, the seeds of mistrust and fear would continue to germinate. Each unexplained noise, every shadow that flickered along the corridors, became a reminder of that fateful night when the creature first made contact. And though attempts were made to reestablish order and to piece together a coherent understanding of the events, a lingering uncertainty persisted, a silent acknowledgement that the alien presence had irrevocably altered the fabric of their existence. Thus, as the chapter of the first contact closed on that tumultuous night, a new era began at Glacier Point Station, one defined not only by scientific inquiry, but also by the profound and unyielding terror of the unknown. With every passing moment, as the researchers continued their desperate efforts to reclaim control, the memory of that unearthly cry and the violent shattering of the containment unit served as a haunting reminder. Sometimes, the greatest threat is not the creature itself, but the chaos and mistrust it sows within the hearts of those who dare to confront it. Chapter 6. The Shapeshifter's Game. The aftermath of the chaos at Glacier Point Station had left the research team reeling. In the tense days following the creature's horrifying breakout, fear and suspicion had woven themselves into the very fabric of everyday interactions. Now, as the station struggled to regain a semblance of order, a new and even more unsettling realization began to take hold. The creature possessed the unnerving ability to mimic those it encountered. This revelation would ignite a psychological battle that threatened to fracture the team irreparably. It started with subtle discrepancies. At first, it was nothing more than an offhand comment, a peculiar resemblance in the way one scientist spoke, a fleeting gesture that echoed another's habitual mannerism. Dr. Malcolm Weiss was the first to notice. In the sterile confines of the central lab, while poring over a series of anomalous spectral readings from the creature's remnants, he observed that one set of data did not match the original parameters recorded earlier. His eyes darted between the monitors and the faces of his colleagues as he wondered if his mind, already burdened with the weight of the inexplicable, was playing tricks on him. Later that afternoon, while the team gathered for a brief meeting to assess the situation, Astrid Nygaard felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Antarctic cold. As she looked around the cramped conference room, she saw something she could not quite place, a flicker of recognition in the eyes of one of the junior researchers, Tobias, whose mannerisms were now eerily similar to those of the creature documented in earlier images. It was as if the creature's presence had seeped into the human psyche, blurring the lines between observer and observed. Astrid's heart pounded as she struggled to reconcile the familiar with the monstrous. Dr. Henrik Falk attempted to rally his team with rational explanations. "We must assume that the stress of our circumstances is distorting our perceptions," he insisted, though his voice betrayed a hint of uncertainty. Yet even as he spoke, quiet murmurs and furtive glances began to circulate among the researchers. Ethan Hayes, the station's steadfast helicopter pilot, had taken to keeping a wary distance from the group. His once confident eyes now darted nervously about the room, as though expecting the very shadows to spring to life and mimic a colleague's form. By the end of that long day, paranoia had already begun to take root. The creature's uncanny ability to imitate its victims was no longer a theoretical concern, but an ever-present possibility. It was then that Dr. Weiss proposed a series of tests, improvised measures designed to distinguish genuine human behavior from that of a shape-shifting imposter. The meeting convened in the station's cramped testing chamber, a repurposed storage room lined with reinforced steel walls. There, a haphazard assortment of sensors, cameras, and biometric scanners had been arranged in a circle. "Until now, we have assumed that the entity is a static anomaly, confined by the physical limits of its frozen prison," Dr. Weiss explained, addressing the assembly of weary faces. "But if it can mimic our appearances, then it may also copy our behavioral patterns. We must subject each of you to a series of tests, psychological, physiological, and behavioral, to determine if any of you have been compromised." His tone was clinical, but the implication of his words sent a shiver down everyone's spine. The tests were designed to be as unintrusive as possible while generating objective data. Each researcher was asked to participate in a series of interviews and tasks. They were required to recount personal memories, solve puzzles that required emotional insight, and perform tasks that involved spontaneous decision-making. Every detail was recorded, from the cadence of their voices to the subtlest twitch of their facial muscles. In the sterile glow of the testing monitors, even the slightest deviation from an individual's baseline was scrutinized. At first, the tests proceeded without incident. One by one, the researchers answered questions about their pasts, their families, their hopes and fears. The recordings were analyzed in real time, and the data seemed to confirm that everyone was, at least on the surface, human. But as the hours wore on, inconsistencies began to emerge. Tobias, whose nervous demeanor had been apparent from the start, hesitated before answering a seemingly trivial question about his childhood. His voice wavered, and his eyes betrayed a moment of uncertainty that was recorded by the sensitive audio equipment. Meanwhile, a quiet technician named Sigrid, who had always been considered reliable, occasionally offered responses that sounded rehearsed, a slight stutter in her words, a delay in her reaction that defied her usual promptness. As the test continued, the atmosphere in the testing chamber grew increasingly oppressive. Every participant became both examiner and suspect. Friendships that had once been forged by shared hardships began to fracture as doubts took hold. Whispers spread like wildfire in the dim corridors outside the chamber. "Did you notice how Sigrid's eyes looked vacant?" one researcher murmured to another. "And Tobias. He paused too long when asked about his family. It was as if he were searching for the right answer," another added, his tone laced with distrust. Dr. Falk, who had been overseeing the testing procedure, felt the weight of the mounting tension. He knew that the creature's ability to mimic was more than a biological anomaly. It was a threat that could undermine the very foundations of their unity. "We cannot allow fear to erode our ability to work together," he pleaded during a brief assembly in the command hub. "If we let suspicion rule our interactions, then the creature has already won." His words, intended to restore order, were met with skeptical looks. The seed of mistrust had been planted, and no amount of rational discourse could immediately uproot it. In the midst of the testing, an unexpected incident occurred that would crystallize the terror of the unknown. Late one night, as the station lay shrouded in a heavy silence broken only by the low hum of machinery, a soft knock echoed along the corridor outside the testing chamber. It was a knock that seemed to come from nowhere, a gentle rhythmic tapping that was at odds with the stifling tension inside. Dr. Weiss, disturbed by the sound, stepped out into the dim corridor, followed by a few anxious team members. The corridor, illuminated only by flickering emergency lights, stretched long and narrow, its walls lined with metal panels and faded photographs of previous expeditions. As they approached the source of the sound, The group saw something that made their blood run cold. Standing in the doorway, framed by the cold light of the corridor, was a figure that was an exact duplicate of one of their own. For a long, excruciating moment, no one moved. The duplicate's eyes were empty yet strangely familiar, its posture mirroring that of the missing researcher who had been undergoing the tests earlier that day. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the sound of shallow breathing. Then, as if it were a challenge issued by the unknown, the figure stepped back into the shadows and vanished as silently as it had appeared. The incident sent shockwaves to the team. Back in the testing chamber, panic mingled with disbelief. The realization that the creature could assume the appearance of a trusted colleague was too horrifying to contemplate. It was no longer a matter of abstract suspicion. The threat was personal and immediate. Paranoia took hold, and every interaction became fraught with the possibility that the person before them might not be who they claimed to be. In the days that followed, the testing process was overhauled in an attempt to restore order and identify the imposters. Dr. Weiss instituted a new series of measures that combined biometric scanning with psychological profiling. Every individual was subjected to simultaneous voice recognition, retinal scans, and heart rate variability analysis. The goal was to capture data that was as unique and unforgeable as a human fingerprint, a data set that even a shapeshifter could not easily replicate. Yet, as the tests grew more invasive, the strain on the team's already fragile morale intensified. Conversations in the narrow corridors of Glacier Point Station became hushed and guarded. Long-standing friendships, forged in the crucible of shared danger and discovery, began to splinter under the weight of suspicion. A casual greeting in the mess hall was now accompanied by a lingering, uncertain glance. "Are you sure you're feeling all right?" one researcher asked another. The simple question loaded with unspoken doubt. Even the slightest misstep, a pause too long before answering a question, a hesitation when recounting a memory, was scrutinized and met with cold, suspicious stares. One afternoon, as a pale winter light filtered weakly through the high windows of the main laboratory, Emily Shaw found herself alone with her thoughts. The quiet isolation of her workspace did little to quell the inner turmoil that had taken root since the first instant of mimicry. She replayed the events of that fateful night over and over, her mind searching desperately for rational explanations. Could it be that extreme stress and isolation had driven her colleagues to exhibit behavior that was not their own? Or was it possible that the creature, with its insidious power to imitate, had already begun to infiltrate their ranks? The uncertainty gnawed at her, leaving her sleepless and increasingly distant from those around her. Her concerns were confirmed one chilly evening when, during a routine data review session, she discovered subtle discrepancies in the biometric logs. A set of retinal scans, which should have been identical for a given individual, now showed minor but statistically significant variations. The differences were slight, a fraction of a percent, but in the context of what they'd experienced, they were damning. Emily's pulse quickened as she documented her findings, and hesitantly approached Dr. Falk. "I believe we are dealing with more than mere psychological stress," she said softly. "The data suggests that at least one person's biometric markers have been altered. We may have already lost someone to the creature's mimicry." Dr. Falk's face hardened with grim determination. "Then we must act decisively," he declared. "We cannot allow this infestation of doubt to tear us apart. We will conduct a full review of everyone's individual data and compare it to our initial baselines. If anyone is found to be an imposter or altered in any way, we will isolate them immediately." His proclamation was intended to be both a promise and a warning, a signal that the unity of the team was at stake. In the hours that followed, teams were organized to re-examine every record, every piece of data stored since the beginning of the mission. Tension permeated every discussion as colleagues questioned each other's accounts of events and scrutinized every gesture for signs of duplicity. The testing apparatus, once a tool of scientific inquiry, had become an instrument of suspicion, a mechanism by which friends might be pitted against one another in a desperate bid for self-preservation. The psychological toll was profound. In quiet moments, when the station's corridors were empty and the only sound was the persistent hum of machinery, researchers found themselves plagued by visions of their own faces warping into something alien. Sleep became elusive, and nightmares filled with shifting shapes and unknown voices haunted their dreams. The boundary between reality and illusion grew thinner with each passing day, and every whispered word, every sideways glance, deepened the wound of mistrust. Yet, in the midst of this internal strife, a few voices of reason still emerged. Dr. Weiss, though deeply disturbed by the events, continued to advocate for rational investigation. "We must not allow our fear to override our duty to seek the truth," he reminded his colleagues during one of the many emergency briefings. "It is precisely in times of uncertainty that the scientific method must prevail. We will analyze the data, test our hypotheses, and only then can we hope to determine who or what is among us." His measured tone, though imbued with urgency, served as a beacon for those willing to cling to reason in the midst of chaos. As the days turned into a grueling cycle of testing, accusations, and sleepless nights, alliances began to crumble. Long-standing relationships, once characterized by mutual respect and shared purpose, were now marked by bitterness and resentment. A heated argument in the rec room between two senior researchers escalated into a near-physical altercation when one accused the other of deliberately sabotaging the testing equipment. The incident, though quickly subdued by security personnel, left an indelible scar on the team's morale. Every interaction, every conversation, became a minefield of unspoken accusations and lingering doubts. By the end of a particularly long and agonizing week, the full extent of the situation was laid bare. The data was conclusive. At least one individual in the group exhibited biometric and behavioral anomalies that could not be explained by stress alone. The implications were staggering. The creature's mimicry was not merely a trick of biology. It was an active, deliberate process. Someone among them was no longer truly human, but a facsimile of their former self, a shapeshifter whose allegiance was as uncertain as its origin. The revelation sent shockwaves to the station. In an emergency meeting held in the Central Command Hub, Dr. Falk's voice trembled with a mixture of authority and despair as he addressed the assembled researchers. "We are facing an enemy that does not wear a uniform," he said slowly, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of recognition or denial. "The creature among us can take on the appearance, the mannerisms, and even the memories of those we have come to trust. We must now confront the possibility that one of us is not who they appear to be. But this is not merely a test of our scientific acumen, but a test of our very humanity." In that moment, the station's already fragile unity splintered completely. Accusations flew freely, fingers were pointed, and voices were raised as colleagues demanded that the suspected individual be isolated immediately. Yet, even as chaos reigned, a few steadfast voices called for calm. "We must not let fear blind us to reason," implored Dr. Weiss. "Our strength lies in our ability to work together even in the face of the unknown. Let us continue our testing and let the data speak for itself." Over the next several days, the station became a crucible of conflicting emotions. Every interaction was tinged with a sense of dread. Every conversation, no matter how mundane, was analyzed for hidden meanings. The shapeshifter's game had begun in earnest, and its rules were dictated by paranoia and the desperate need for survival. As each test was repeated, as every record was scrutinized, the boundaries between friend and foe blurred further. The scientific quest that had once united them was now overshadowed by the most human of emotions: fear. In a final somber assembly convened in the command hub, Dr. Falk laid out the path forward. "We have identified anomalies that indicate the presence of a mimic among us," he stated, his voice steady despite the turmoil. "Until we can confirm the identity of the imposter, we must take every precaution. We will isolate the affected individuals in controlled environments and continue our testing under strict supervision. Our only hope of regaining control is to trust in the data and in the scientific process." His words, though delivered with grim resolve, offered little solace to a group whose bond had been shattered. As the testing protocols were tightened and the station's security measures heightened, a new atmosphere of guarded determination emerged. The team, once united by a shared passion for discovery, was now a collection of individuals bound together by the necessity of survival in the face of an enemy that could be any one of them. In the sterile confines of Glacier Point Station, where every whispered conversation and furtive glance carried the weight of suspicion, the game of shapes and shadows had only just begun. In the quiet hours before dawn, as the station's corridors lay bathed in the cold glow of emergency lights, each researcher wrestled with the knowledge that the creature's mimicry had upended everything they once held dear. Trust, that most fragile of human bonds, had been eroded by the creeping certainty that the enemy might be staring back at them from every reflective surface. And in that crucible of fear and uncertainty, the shapeshifter's game promised to leave no one untouched. In the days to come, the researchers will be forced to confront not only the external threat of the alien presence, but also the internal fractures that now define their existence. Every test, every conversation, every interaction would be colored by the knowledge that their own reflections might hide a secret that can mean the difference between survival and annihilation. And so, with heavy hearts and minds burdened by doubt, the team braced themselves for the long, uncertain journey ahead. A journey in which every step was a gamble and every moment a test of what it truly meant to be human. Chapter 7. Fractured Trust. The oppressive corridors of Glacier Point Station had become a crucible for the soul, a place where every step echoed with the weight of unspoken fears and every whispered conversation bore the mark of a slowly unraveling camaraderie. In the days since the creature's first contact and the subsequent test that revealed its uncanny mimicry, the station had transformed from a beacon of scientific inquiry into a pressure cooker of suspicion and dread. Here, in the claustrophobic interiors where isolation pressed in from all sides, each individual was forced to confront not only the external threat of the alien presence, but also the internal fractures in their own hearts and minds. Trust, once taken for granted, was now as fragile as the ice that encased the mysteries of Antarctica. Within a cramped, windowless corridor near the central command hub, Dr. Henrik Falk stood alone for a long moment, his eyes fixed on a spot on the worn metal wall. His thoughts churned like the turbulent sea of doubts that had grown within him since the mimicry had been revealed. Falk's mind wandered back over years of exploration, to moments when every challenge had been met with steadfast resolve. Yet now, even the confidence that had defined his leadership seemed to crumble under the weight of ethical and moral dilemmas that he could no longer ignore. He recalled the day he first arrived at Glacier Point Station, full of hope and scientific curiosity, a man determined to push the boundaries of human knowledge. Back then, he had been driven by a pure desire to explore, to uncover secrets hidden beneath centuries of ice and time. But as the alien entity's presence became undeniable, the drive to survive began to war with the need to contain what might be humanity's greatest discovery, or its most perilous curse. Every decision now was a balancing act between the promise of advancement and the risk of unleashing forces that defied understanding. His internal monologue, raw and unfiltered, asked, was it nobler to preserve human life at any cost, or to risk everything in pursuit of an elusive truth? Elsewhere in the station, Astrid and Nygaard wrestled with her own inner demons. The quiet hours spent poring over streams of sensor data had left her with more questions than answers, and the constant vigilance had begun to take its toll on her mind. Late at night, when the station was shrouded in silence, save for the low hum of machines, Astrid would sit at her desk in the cramped laboratory, replaying the day's events in a ceaseless loop. She remembered the moment she first noticed the subtle irregularities in the creature's thermal signatures, the soft pulse that seemed to echo a heartbeat, the way the energy fluctuations mimicked the cadence of human emotion. In those moments, Astrid had felt a kinship with the enigma before her, as if it were a reflection of her own hidden fears and desires. But as time passed, that initial connection soured into a bitter cocktail of dread and mistrust. She began to question not only the alien entity's motives, but also her colleagues, their willingness to sacrifice ethics on the altar of scientific progress. How far will we go? She wondered silently, her thoughts dark and introspective. Will our drive to contain the unknown push us to betray each other? To forsake our moral compass in pursuit of data? Her internal struggle was compounded by memories of a past she rarely shared, a childhood marked by loss and betrayal that left her with an unyielding need to protect what was hers. Now, that ethane need manifested as a desperate desire to guard the truth from being twisted by human ambition, even as she realized that trust among her team was eroding with every passing day. In a cramped rec room that doubled as a mess hall, Emily Shaw sat with her back against a chipped metal wall, her eyes distanced as she nursed a lukewarm cup of coffee. The soft clatter of utensils and murmurs of hushed conversations provided a backdrop to the internal tempest raging within her. Emily, a brilliant paleontologist with a keen sense of history and legacy, had always been driven by the pursuit of knowledge. Yet, as she mulled over the events of the past week, her mind was troubled by the realization that the quest for truth could exact a heavy toll on human relationships. Every glance exchanged across the table, every half-smile or forced laugh, carried the weight of suspicion. She recalled the moment during the biometric tests when her own data had registered a slight anomaly, so subtle that she had initially dismissed it as a system error. Now, with every passing hour, that anomaly gnawed at her, serving as a constant reminder that the creature's influence might be far more insidious than anyone had anticipated. In a quiet corner of the station's archive, a dim room filled with dusty manuscripts and records of past expeditions, Dr. Malcolm Weiss sat hunched over a battered leather journal. He meticulously recorded his thoughts, not merely as scientific observations, but as reflections on the human condition in the face of the unknown. Malcolm's inner dialogue was punctuated by memories of a father who had instilled in him the value of reason and rationality, only to see those very principles crumble in the aftermath of personal tragedy. Now, confronted by the possibility that one of his colleagues might not be entirely human, or might have been overtaken by the alien mimicry, Malcolm felt the searing pain of betrayal. "What is the price of progress?" he scribbled in the margins, his handwriting trembling. "Are we to sacrifice our ethics, our humanity, simply to unlock the secrets of an ancient force?" His words, heavy with regret and disillusionment, echoed the sentiments of a man caught between duty and despair. As tensions mounted, the physical confines of Glacier Point Station began to feel increasingly oppressive. The once familiar corridors, illuminated by the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, now seemed to close in around the researchers like the walls of a tomb. Every door that creaked open, every shadow that danced at the edge of vision, became a potential harbinger of betrayal. In the command hub, a claustrophobic room lined with monitors, control panels, and hastily scrawled memos, the atmosphere was thick with anxiety. Researchers huddled together in small clusters, their voices low and urgent as they discussed failed escape attempts and the suspicious behaviors that had surfaced in the aftermath of the creature's emergence. One such incident had occurred just days earlier. A group of technicians had attempted to evacuate a section of the station that they believed was compromised by the alien presence. The escape, hastily planned and fraught with miscommunication, ended in disaster when the makeshift route collapsed under the weight of panicked footsteps and frantic shouts. In the chaos, several individuals had been injured, and the already fragile infrastructure of the station has suffered further damage. The failed escape attempt served as a brutal reminder that, in the struggle for survival, even the most well-intentioned actions could spiral out of control. It was an incident that deepened the fissures of mistrust, as each member of the team began to wonder whether their own actions might inadvertently trigger another catastrophe. During one particularly tense confrontation in the mess hall, a long-simmering dispute finally erupted into open hostility. Two senior researchers, whose names had once been spoken with admiration, found themselves locked in a bitter argument over the proper protocol for handling the mimic's potential influence. One accused the other of deliberately withholding critical data, while the other retorted with accusations of recklessness and self-interest. Their voices rose, echoing off metal walls, until even Ethan Hayes, the ever-calm pilot who had seen his share of crises, intervened with a forceful demand for order. "Enough!" he bellowed, his tone leaving no room for further dissent. "We are on the brink of losing not only our research but our very lives. If we cannot trust one another, then we have already lost." In the weeks that followed, the relentless pressure of uncertainty drove some researchers to the brink of despair. Sleep became a rare commodity as nightmares filled with shifting faces and accusing whispers plagued their restless nights. In one of these sleepless vigils, Astrid found herself pacing the narrow corridors with a pounding heart and a mind overwhelmed by a relentless barrage of what-if scenarios. "What if one of us is already gone?" she whispered to the darkness, her voice trembling. "What if the creature's game had already claimed a part of our souls?" Her internal monologue was a litany of fears. Fears that the pursuit of knowledge had blinded them to the more fundamental need for trust and compassion. Amidst this maelstrom of emotion, a series of smaller yet equally insidious incidents began to escalate. A researcher discovered that his personal belongings had been tampered with, small, inexplicable changes that suggested someone, or something, had been meddling with his possessions. Another colleague found cryptic messages scrawled on the walls of his quarters, messages that seemed to hint at the presence of an imposter lurking in the shadows. These incidents, while individually minor, compounded over time into a pervasive sense of violation. Every footstep, every creak of the station's ancient infrastructure now carried the potential for hidden danger. The station had become a labyrinth of distrust, where the boundaries between friend and foe were blurred by fear and desperation. In the central command hub, Dr. Falk convened a meeting of the highest urgency. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the glow of multiple monitors displaying streams of biometric data, security footage, and encrypted messages from headquarters. As the researchers gathered in a semicircle, Falk's eyes met those of his colleagues, eyes that were now clouded with doubt and suspicion. "We must confront the reality that our greatest enemy may not lie outside these walls," he said, his voice steady yet laden with sorrow. "Our internal divisions, our fear of the unknown, are as dangerous as any external threat. We have allowed our desperation to fracture the bonds that once united us. If we do not act now, if we do not find a way to restore trust, then our efforts to contain this alien presence will be in vain." His words, echoing in the silence of the command hub, resonated with each individual present. It was a plea for unity in the face of a relentless and implacable force, a call to remember that they were all, at their core, human beings fighting for survival. Yet even as Falk's voice rang out, the scars of mistrust were not easily healed. Whispers and furtive glances continued to punctuate every interaction, a constant reminder that the specter of betrayal loomed over them all. For many, the ethical and moral dilemmas had become unbearable. Dr. Weiss, whose calm rationality had once been a guiding light, now found himself questioning every decision he had ever made. In the solitude of his private quarters, he would pore over his notes and data, each page a reminder of the cost that had been paid in the name of progress. Have we sacrificed too much in our pursuit of truth? He wondered bitterly. Is it possible that the very act of containment is poisoning us from within? His internal debates were as fierce as any external confrontation, and they left him with a profound sense of isolation that no one else seemed able to comprehend. At the ethane time, Emily Shaw wrestled with the competing demands of scientific inquiry and the need to preserve the fragile remnants of human decency. In quiet moments between the forced interactions and tense group discussions, she would retreat to the small library of the station, a place where the accumulated wisdom of past generations offered a semblance of solace. There, surrounded by books and historical records, Emily reflected on the price of knowledge. "What is the cost of progress?" she wrote in her journal, her pen scratching out words that trembled with emotion. "If we lose ourselves in the process, if we allow suspicion to drive us apart, then all our efforts will be for naught." Her words were a lament for a time when trust had been taken for granted, a time before the alien presence had sowed seeds of doubt in every heart. As days bled into nights and nights into a seemingly endless cycle of testing and confrontation, the station's claustrophobic atmosphere grew ever more stifling. Every room, every corridor became a stage upon which the drama of fractured trust was played out. Failed escape attempts, once isolated incidents, began to occur with alarming regularity. A group of researchers, desperate to flee the oppressive environment and search for answers in the open Antarctic night, attempted to break out of the station. Their escape, fraught with miscommunication and panic, ended in a chaotic debacle that left several injured and the door of one critical passageway irreparably damaged. The failure of this escape attempt was a blatant physical manifestation of the internal strife that now defined Glacier Point Station. In the aftermath, heated confrontations became a daily occurrence. Accusations were hurled like daggers in the crowded mess hall, and bitter recriminations were exchanged in hushed tones along narrow corridors. Each confrontation added another crack to the fragile veneer of unity that the team had once relied upon. In one particularly volatile encounter, a trusted senior technician, whose steady hands had once been celebrated as the backbone of the station's operations, was publicly accused of withholding crucial information about recent anomalies. The ensuing argument evolved into a shouting match that left both parties bruised, not only physically, but emotionally. In that moment, as voices clashed and trust disintegrated further, it became painfully clear that the greatest challenge was not the alien presence outside, but the enemy within. In the midst of this escalating crisis, some individuals began to question whether it was possible to ever restore the bonds that had been so ruthlessly shattered. A small group, led by the resolute yet visibly shaken Ethan Hayes, gathered late one night in a secluded corner of the station's maintenance bay. There, amid the dull glow of emergency lights and the soft rumble of machinery, they attempted to forge a fragile alliance. "We cannot let this creature, whatever it is, define us further," Ethan declared, his voice steady despite the fear that lurked beneath. "We have survived the unknown outside these walls. Now we must learn to trust each other again, or we will be lost from within." His words, simple yet powerful, offered a glimmer of hope to a few, even as many others remained steeped in suspicion. Still, the road to reconciliation was steeped in uncertainty. In quiet moments of introspection, each researcher was forced to confront their own internal dilemmas, moral quandaries that had grown in complexity with every passing hour. The drive to survive, to preserve the small flame of human life in an icy expanse of despair, battled relentlessly with the need to contain an alien force that threatened to upend everything they had ever known. In private conversations, often held in hushed tones or scribbled in the pages of personal journals, they wrestled with the questions that had no easy answers. "Do we have the right to sacrifice one of our own for the sake of the many?" one voice asked, trembling with uncertainty. "And what price will we pay when we cross the line between science and savagery?" These questions, heavy with consequence, hung in the air like an unyielding fog. As the tension within Glacier Point Station continued to escalate, the atmosphere grew oppressively claustrophobic. Every hallway, every sealed door, became a reminder of the shrinking space in which trust and sanity could reside. With each new incident, each failed escape, each suspicious behavior, each bitter confrontation, the fragile foundation of unity crumbled a little more. The station, once a haven of scientific progress, had become a living nightmare where every interaction was tinged with dread and uncertainty. In that crucible of despair, the researchers slowly came to the realization that fractured trust was not merely a side effect of their circumstances, but the very essence of their current existence. They had become prisoners not only of Glacier Point Station's icy confines, but also of their own inner demons, the doubts and fears that had been sown by an alien force capable of assuming any form. And so, as night gave way to day in the perpetual twilight of the Antarctic, they braced themselves for what lay ahead, a future where the line between friend and foe was irretrievably blurred, and every heartbeat echoed with the knowledge that only through unity could they hope to survive. In the final hours of that long, harrowing week, as a pall of uncertainty settled over the station, Dr. Falk gathered the remaining members of the team in the central command hub. With a voice both weary and resolute, he spoke words meant to pierce the darkness of mistrust and kindle the faint embers of solidarity. "We are all that remains in this battle. Not just against the alien force that lurks beyond these walls, but against the creeping corruption of our own hearts. We must choose. Will we let fear and suspicion define us? Or will we find the strength to trust one another once more? The path ahead is uncertain, and the cost may be higher than we ever imagined. But if we are to survive, we must reclaim the bonds that make us human." As his words faded into the oppressive silence of the command hub, the researchers exchanged long, searching looks. In that moment, amid the wreckage of shattered trust and broken hopes, a fragile resolve began to take shape. It was not a solution born of blind optimism, but of the painful acknowledgement that, in the face of an alien threat that could mimic any one of them, only unity could offer the chance for redemption. And so, with heavy hearts and minds burdened by the lessons of fractured trust, the team at Glacier Point Station took tentative steps toward rebuilding what had been lost. Their journey was far from over, each day a battle against the internal demons as much as external horrors. But in that struggle, they clung to the hope that even the deepest wounds might one day heal, and that the human spirit, tested by the most unimaginable forces, could yet rise above the chaos of fear. Part 3. The Collapse. Chapter 8. The Siege. The alarms had been wailing for what felt like an eternity, and the once pristine corridors of Glacier Point Station now resembled the fevered dream of a dying man. The creature's presence, once an abstract terror confined to data screens and whispered theories, had now erupted into full-blown chaos. Every surface, every crevice of the station bore witness to a relentless onslaught of violence and despair. The alien entity was no longer something contained in a secure unit. It had become a living, twisting nightmare that roamed the hallways, its influence seeping into every human heart. In the central atrium of Glacier Point Station, shattered glass and twisted metal lay scattered across the floor, evidence of the earlier breach that had shattered both the containment unit and the fragile illusion of safety. Dr. Henrik Falk, his face etched with both determination and dread, surveyed the destruction from a distance. He remembered a time when the station had been a sanctuary of scientific pursuit, a beacon of hope in the relentless Antarctic darkness. Now, it was a fortress under siege by an enemy that defied logic, a creature whose every movement exuded a raw, malevolent power. The station's once rhythmic heartbeat, maintained by the constant hum of machinery and the quiet murmur of scientific inquiry, had been replaced by a cacophony of screams, shouts, and the unyielding clatter of desperate footsteps. The corridors that had once been the arteries of research and camaraderie were now choked with panicked survivors and the injured, their eyes wide with terror as they sought escape from the alien menace. In this grim tableau, the dwindling number of survivors was painfully apparent. Bodies lay crumpled in doorways and along narrow passageways, casualties of both the creature's rampage and the chaos it had incited. As the creature moved through the station, its monstrous silhouette illuminated sporadically by the flickering emergency lights, every soul present felt the crushing weight of their mortality. The physical toll was evident. Bruised faces, torn clothing, and wounds that spoke of frantic, uncoordinated attempts at defense. But it was the mental toll that cut deepest, a pervasive, soul-crushing dread that seeped into every thought. No one was safe. No one could trust the person standing next to them. The creature's ability to twist reality, to mimic its victims, had already sown the seeds of betrayal and suspicion. Now, as it rampaged unchecked, that mistrust coalesced into a palpable enemy of its own. In one of the lower corridors, near the engineering quarters, Ethan Hayes, the station's veteran helicopter pilot, raced along the dim passageway. His boots pounded against the cold metal floor as he carried a portable communication device, desperately trying to re-establish contact with a backup outpost. His heart pounded in his chest, not merely from the physical exertion, but from the overwhelming fear that the station was slipping beyond his control. "This is Hayes," he barked into the device, his voice cracking with urgency. "We're under siege. I repeat, Glacier Point Station is under siege. I need immediate assistance and extraction coordinates. If anyone is still listening, please respond." In the control room, a small group of survivors huddled together, their faces pale and eyes wide as they listened to Hayes' call echo through the static. Among them was Astrid Nygaard, whose steady hands had once been the very symbol of scientific rigor. Now, even as she tried to maintain composure, her mind was a maelstrom of fear and regret. She recalled the data she had painstakingly gathered, the slow, rhythmic pulses of energy that had first hinted at the creature's latent power. Those readings had promised mystery and discovery. Instead, they had foretold disaster. Her thoughts raced. Had they been so blinded by ambition that they unleashed an uncontrollable horror? Astrid clutched her tablet tightly as she made her way through the chaos, her eyes scanning every shadow for signs of movement. Every door she passed seemed to hide new terrors, every corner a potential ambush. The station, once a marvel of human engineering and perseverance, was now a labyrinth of fear. She paused near a shattered viewpoint overlooking the endless frozen wasteland outside. In that moment, she recalled memories of her childhood, of stories her mother had told her about ancient forces lurking beneath the ice, forces that were better left undisturbed. Now, those stories were no longer myths. They were horrifying reality. Elsewhere in the Central Command Hub, Dr. Malcolm Weiss convened a hurried meeting with the few remaining senior staff. His normally calm demeanor had given way to a grim urgency. "We have two choices," he said, his voice resonant with both sorrow and determination. "Either we let this creature tear us apart, or we stand together and make a final stand to quarantine the threat. I refuse to believe that all our sacrifices will be in vain." His words were met with a mixture of nods and desperate glances. They knew that every moment wasted increased the likelihood that the creature would breach another barrier, that it would claim more lives. The plan that was quickly formulated was desperate but clear. Isolate the creature in a single sector of the station, fortify that area, and engage in a controlled, albeit dangerous, operation to neutralize it. The survivors were to gather in the fortified central atrium, where a makeshift barrier had been hastily erected from reinforced panels salvaged from the damaged lab. This barrier, though rudimentary, was their last hope of keeping the creature contained. Dr. Falk, his voice strained with authority, addressed the group. "We have fought this enemy on every front, and now we must commit ourselves to one final effort. Our goal is to quarantine the threat. We will seal off the infected sector and hold it at all costs. I know this means sacrifices, perhaps even betrayal, but it is our only chance to survive." His words, though hard to swallow, resonated with a small band of resolute souls. Among them was Emily Shaw, whose eyes brimmed with tears as she listened to the plan. She recalled the moments when trust had been their guiding light, when every discovery had been shared in the hope of progress. Now that light was flickering, threatened by the darkness of despair and division. "I will do whatever it takes," she declared softly, her voice steadied by a deep inner resolve. "We must protect what remains of our humanity, even if it costs us everything." As the survivors began to implement the plan, the station itself seemed to groan under the weight of its collective anguish. In the narrow corridors, whispers of sacrifice and betrayal echoed in every step. A once united team now fractured into isolated clusters, each group driven by a singular instinct to survive, even if it meant turning against one another. In one heart-wrenching moment, a technician named Sigrid, who had been one of the first to record anomalous data, was forced to choose between aiding an injured colleague and securing a critical access panel that would help hold the barrier. With tears in her eyes, she made the agonizing decision to secure the panel, even as her friend's anguished cry echoed behind her. Such moments of sacrifice and betrayal, of heroism and despair, unfolded relentlessly as the siege pressed in on all sides. The creature, sensing the rising panic and the fracturing resolve of the survivors, intensified its assault. It moved like a shadow through the station, slipping through cracks and breaches in the makeshift barricades. Its presence was heralded by guttural roars and an almost palpable aura of malice that sapped the strength of those who encountered it. In one harrowing episode, a group attempting to reinforce the central barrier found themselves ambushed in a narrow corridor. The creature struck swiftly, a blur of contorted limbs and jagged inhuman features, leaving behind only silence and a trail of broken bodies. The survivors, driven by a mix of terror and determination, managed to fend off the attack, but at a dire cost. Several lives were lost, and the morale of the group was shattered further. In the midst of the chaos, desperate measures were taken. A small team, led by Dr. Falk and Ethan Hayes, was dispatched to activate an experimental quarantine protocol. Their target was a remote sector of the station that housed critical infrastructure. If sealed off properly, it could serve as a temporary holding area to trap the creature. The journey to this sector was fraught with peril. The corridors were dimly lit, and every step was a gamble between life and death. Along the way, they encountered pockets of survivors, some barricaded behind overturned furniture, others huddled in terrified silence. Ethan Hayes, ever the voice of stoic resolve, urged them onward with firm commands. "We must move quickly. Every minute we hesitate gives that thing more time to breach our defenses." The team's progress was slow and measured. At one point, as they reached a particularly narrow hallway, a sudden commotion erupted behind them. A group of survivors, desperate and disoriented, had attempted a mass exodus through an unsecured service door. Their panicked shouts and the sound of shattering glass reverberated down the hall, drawing the attention of both the quarantine team and the creature. In that fleeting moment, as chaos surged like a tidal wave, trust among the survivors was put to its ultimate test. Some members of the quarantine team tried to corral the fleeing group, urging them to return and follow orders. Others, gripped by sheer terror, broke away, their eyes glazed with the shock of impending doom. The result was a cacophony of conflicting actions, a desperate scramble for survival that left the corridor littered with abandoned equipment and the cries of the wounded. Back in the fortified atrium, the survivors gathered in a circle around the hastily constructed barrier. Their faces were gaunt and eyes hollow, the physical and mental toll of the siege etched into every line of their features. In that moment of grim silence, a heavy realization settled over them. They were fighting not only an external enemy, but also the insidious forces of fear and mistrust that threatened to tear the group apart. Dr. Falk stepped forward, his voice low and resolute as he addressed the assembly. "We are at the end of our tether," he said, his eyes sweeping over the gathered faces. Every life we lose, every moment we falter, brings us closer to total annihilation. But in the midst of this chaos, there is still hope. Hope that we can, together, reclaim our humanity and defeat this threat. We must be willing to sacrifice, to trust, and to fight for each other, even when the darkness seems all-consuming. Those words, spoken with the weight of a man who had witnessed both the heights of human ingenuity and the depths of despair, sparked a renewed, if fragile, determination in some of the survivors. Emily Shaw, her voice trembling but determined, added, "I've seen the worst of what this creature can do, but I have also seen the courage in each of you. We must hold on to that courage, for it is all we have left." Her words were met with nods of murmurs of agreement, though the shadows in their eyes betrayed the lingering fear that perhaps this courage would not be enough. As the siege wore on, the station itself became a living testament to the cost of survival. The corridors were stained with blood and smeared with grime, the walls scarred by the impact of desperate assaults. The once orderly laboratories and control rooms were now sites of frantic improvisation, where every surface was repurposed as a barricade and every exit was sealed in a desperate bid to keep the creature at bay. The constant barrage of attacks, both from the creature and from the mounting internal strife, left the survivors physically exhausted and mentally frayed. Sleep was a luxury few could afford. Even in moments of temporary respite, the haunting echoes of screams and the sound of shattering metal haunted their dreams. In a particularly harrowing confrontation, a containment team led by Dr. Falk found itself cornered in a narrow maintenance shaft. With nowhere left to run, they prepared for a last stand. The creature, its eyes glowing with a malevolent intelligence, advanced slowly, each measured step a deliberate challenge. In that claustrophobic space, as the survivors braced themselves against the inevitable, sacrifices were made. One of the team members, a young technician named Elias, stepped forward and, with a resolve that belied his trembling frame, hurled himself directly at the creature. His sacrifice, both heroic and heartbreaking, momentarily distracted the monster, allowing the others to secure the door and activate the final phase of the quarantine protocol. As Elias's anguished cries faded into the silence, the survivors felt a surge of conflicting emotions: grief for the lost, anger at the injustice of it all, and a steely determination to honor his sacrifice by ensuring that his death was not in vain. Yet, even as the quarantine measures began to take effect, betrayal and desperation found fertile ground. In the aftermath of the failed mass exodus, several survivors accused one another of cowardice and of intentionally withholding information that might have allowed the creature further access into their secure zones. Fingers were pointed at those who attempted to flee, with some even suggesting that certain individuals might have been compromised by the creature's mimicry. Trust, already frayed by fear, disintegrated further into bitter recrimination. In one particularly volatile meeting in the command hub, voices raised in anger and despair clashed over every detail of the creature's emergence and the decisions that had led them to this catastrophic moment. Dr. Weiss, his face drawn with sorrow, pleaded for unity, while others shouted accusations that stung like razor blades. The meeting ended in chaos, leaving behind a sense of irreversible division that threatened to shatter the last vestiges of order. In the midst of the turmoil, moments of unexpected heroism emerged. Ethan Hayes, who had risked his life multiple times to retrieve stranded survivors and secure vital communication lines, continued to operate with an unyielding determination. His steady presence and unwavering resolve became a beacon for those on the brink of surrender. In one daring act, he personally led a small team through a labyrinth of corridors to rescue a group trapped behind a collapsed bulkhead. Despite the overwhelming odds and the ever-present threat of the creature lurking in the shadows, Hayes' calm, authoritative command and his willingness to place himself in harm's way inspired those around him. His actions, though they could not erase the mounting losses, rekindled a flicker of hope that perhaps, against all odds, they could still reclaim their station and their lives. As the siege dragged on, the physical and mental toll on the survivors became increasingly apparent. Bodies that had once moved with purpose now stumbled in exhaustion. Eyes that had burned with determination dulled with the relentless weight of despair. The constant barrage of attacks had left the station battered and scarred, a prison from which escape seemed as remote as salvation itself. Every fallen comrade, every act of betrayal, every heroic sacrifice etched itself into the collective memory of the survivors, fueling a simmering rage and a desperate resolve to fight on, even as the odds mounted insurmountably. In the final desperate hours of the siege, as the station teetered on the brink of collapse, the remaining survivors gathered in a last-ditch effort to seal off the creature's advance. With improvised explosives, salvaged from the wreckage of broken equipment, and every available tool repurposed as a weapon, they launched a coordinated assault on the creature's position. The plan was as reckless as it was necessary. Drive the creature back into a sealed chamber and detonate the charges. sacrificing whatever remained of the station in a bid to obliterate the alien menace once and for all. Dr. Falk, his voice resolute despite the grim determination in his eyes, addressed the ragged band of survivors one final time. "This is it," he said, his tone a mixture of defiance and sorrow. "We have come to the end of our line. The creature has taken so much from us already. Now we must choose. Let it finish us off, or take our fate into our own hands and risk everything in one final act of defiance." His words, heavy with the burden of countless lost lives, stirred something deep within those gathered. In that moment, every face reflected a mix of grief, anger, and the will to survive, even if it meant embracing the possibility of our own destruction. The final assault was a blur of chaos and courage. In the dim light of the besieged station, as the creature roared and writhed in defiance, survivors hurled themselves into the fray. Explosions rocked the corridor. Shattered debris rained down as the charges detonated in a series of violent blasts. Amid the chaos, Ethan Hayes led a group through a maze of corridors to manually activate the emergency lockdown, a last desperate measure to confine the creature to a single, sealed chamber. As he sprinted through the smoke and rubble, his mind was filled with memories of every sacrifice, every moment of hope that had carried him this far. For a long, agonizing minute, time seemed to stretch into infinity as the survivors awaited the outcome of their final gambit. The sealed chamber trembled under the force of the detonations, the walls buckling and groaning as the alien presence roiled inside. Then, with a final earth-shattering roar that reverberated through every fiber of the station, the chamber imploded in a brilliant flash of light. In that instant, as the survivors shielded their eyes and prayed for deliverance, the creature's presence was extinguished in a maelstrom of fire and sound. When the light finally faded, silence fell over the battered corridors of Glacier Point Station. The survivors emerged slowly from their hiding places, their faces smeared with soot and tears, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and grief. In the aftermath of the final assault, as the echoes of the detonations receded into a mournful stillness, they surveyed the devastation. The station, once a proud symbol of human ingenuity and resilience, now lay in ruins, a testament to the price of defiance and the ravages of an enemy that had tested the very limits of their humanity. In the quiet that followed, as the survivors gathered in the remnants of the central atrium, each person carried the weight of the countless sacrifices made in the struggle for survival. Some knelt to mourn their fallen comrades. Others stared blankly at the shattered remains of a once hallowed sanctuary. Dr. Falk, his voice hoarse with sorrow, spoke in a tone that carried both relief and a deep, abiding loss. "Today, we have paid a heavy price," he said, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We have sacrificed so much to protect what little remains of our hope. But even in the face of overwhelming darkness, we must remember that we fought not just for survival, but for the very essence of what it means to be human." As the survivors began the painstaking process of salvaging what they could from the wreckage, they knew that the scars of this siege, both physical and emotional, would never fully fade. The station had become a monument to their struggle, a place where acts of heroism had intermingled with betrayal and despair. Yet even as they faced an uncertain future, a quiet determination began to stir in their hearts. They had withstood the onslaught of an enemy that had seemed unstoppable, and in doing so they had rediscovered a vital truth, that in the crucible of chaos, the human spirit, however battered, can still rise again. In the days that followed the siege, as rescue teams from distant outposts finally reached the battered remains of Glacier Point Station, the survivors were forced to confront the legacy of their ordeal. They recounted the moments of sacrifice, the heartbreak of betrayal, and the fleeting instances of courage that had illuminated the darkness. Each story, each memory, became a part of a collective narrative, a testament to the cost of survival and the enduring power of hope even amid the ruins. Now, as the station's survivors began the slow process of rebuilding both their physical surroundings and the fragile bonds of trust, they carried with them the memory of that final, desperate assault. It was a memory of fire and blood, of heroic stands and tragic losses, and of the ultimate triumph of the human will in the face of an unimaginable horror. Though the scars of that night will forever mark them, they also served as a reminder that even in the darkest hours, there remains a spark of light that no siege can ever fully extinguish. And so, as the survivors of Glacier Point Station emerged from the ashes of the siege, they vowed to honor the sacrifices of those who had fallen. They resolved to rebuild not only the station, but also the spirit of unity and trust that had once defined their mission. In that solemn promise, there was a glimmer of redemption, a belief that even after the most terrible of sieges, humanity can find the strength to rise again. Chapter 9. The Final Stand. A cacophony of alarms, anguished cries, and the grinding of metal filled the air as the remaining survivors of Glacier Point Station gathered in what remained of the central corridor. The creature, the enigmatic shape-shifting terror that had upended every known law of nature, had been stalking them through the station's labyrinthine halls for days now. In this final confrontation, the tension reached its zenith. Every step taken, every whispered command, every heartbeat was charged with the weight of survival, of sacrifice, and of revelation. Dr. Henrik Falk, his face smeared with sweat and grime, stood at the forefront of the beleaguered group. He scanned the dimly lit corridors with eyes that had seen too much loss and too many betrayals. In his mind, he replayed the moments that had led to this final stand. A journey marked by desperate escapes, splintered alliances, and moral dilemmas that had left the survivors questioning their very humanity. Now, in the flickering light cast by the failing emergency lamps, Falk could see nothing but fear etched on the faces of his colleagues. Yet even in that despair, there burned a fierce determination. They had come to the point where compromise was no longer an option. The creature had to be confronted head-on. "Everyone, listen!" Falk's voice boomed over the din as he raised his hand, demanding attention. "This is our final stand. We know what we're up against now. There is no turning back." His words, rough with emotion and urgency, resonated deeply with the ragged survivors who had gathered around him. They had lost friends, suffered injuries, and seen their sanctuary transform into a nightmare. Now the only course left was to fight, to take the battle directly to the enemy that had sown chaos within their walls. Astrid Nygaard, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and resolve, clutched her tablet as if it were a lifeline. Her meticulous data had shown inexplicable surges of energy moments before the creature attacked. Now, those readings were nothing more than grim proof that the alien presence was far more than a passive anomaly. She recalled the moment when the creature had breached containment, a moment when the very ice that had once held it captive shattered with an almost sentient fury. Now, she was determined to document every anomaly, every heartbeat of this confrontation, even if it meant risking her own life. Beside her stood Emily Shaw, whose voice trembled with both grief and determination. The paleontologist had spent long hours poring over ancient texts and obscure scientific journals, trying to decipher the creature's origins. In the process, she had come to see it not merely as an extraterrestrial threat, but as a force that challenged the very nature of life itself. "We have no choice," she whispered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We must do this, for those we've lost, for what remains of our humanity." Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of countless souls who had perished in the struggle. Ethan Hayes, the stalwart helicopter pilot who had repeatedly risked his life for the sake of others, now gripped his sidearm with a resolve born of countless harrowing flights over the unforgiving Antarctic. His weathered face was set in grim determination as he moved to take up a position near a damaged bulkhead, ready to provide cover and coordinate the survivors' advance. "Stay together, keep your eyes open, and do not let fear paralyze you," he called out, his voice steady despite the chaos. His experience in the skies had taught him that in moments of crisis, unity was the only thing that could keep you alive. Dr. Malcolm Weiss, whose brilliant mind had been their compass in these dark times, now faced the final confrontation with a rare mix of academic curiosity and raw terror. He had spent days analyzing data, trying to understand the creature's mimicry and its uncanny ability to adapt to their every move. As he scanned the corridor with a handheld device, he murmured, "Its behavior. It's almost as if it learns from us, adapts our weaknesses, and turns them against us." His words, barely audible above the chaos, hinted at a revelation that would shake the survivors to their core. The creature was not static. It was evolving in real time, exploiting every sign of vulnerability. The corridor, a long and narrow passage lined with flickering emergency lights, was the setting for this final stand. Debris from shattered walls and fallen equipment lay scattered across the floor, and the sound of distant explosions and collapsing infrastructure reverberated ominously. Every step taken was accompanied by the threat of collapse, of further violence. The creature's presence was felt in every shadow, a silent, predatory force that seemed to anticipate every move the survivors made. Then, with a sudden, bone-chilling roar that cut through the oppressive silence like a knife, the creature emerged at the far end of the corridor. Its form was a grotesque tapestry of shifting matter and pulsating energy. In one moment, it resembled a mass of contorted limbs and amorphous flesh. In the next, it mimicked the appearance of a long-dead colleague, its face an eerie mirror of familiarity that sent shivers down the spines of those who recognized it. The ambiguity of its form, whether it was friend or foe, compounded the terror that gripped the survivors. In that instant, every heartbeat pounded in their ears as if heralding the final clash between life and an unspeakable force. A hush fell over the corridor as the creature halted its advance. Its eyes, or what passed for eyes, seemed to lock onto each individual, as though assessing their worth, their vulnerability. For a moment, time appeared to stand still. The survivors, paralyzed by fear yet driven by a desperate instinct to survive, braced themselves for the ensuing onslaught. It was in that tense silence that the interplay of survival instincts and the jarring realization of their own mortality came into sharp focus. "Now!" shouted Falk, and the survivors surged forward in a desperate charge. In that high-tension moment, every nerve was alight with adrenaline. The corridor became a maelstrom of shouts, gunfire, and the clatter of makeshift weapons. Astrid and Emily, side by side, advanced with trembling determination. Each step was a struggle against paralyzing terror and the overwhelming sense that everything they had known was about to shatter irrevocably. The creature reacted with a speed that defied its size. Its shifting form seemed to blur as it dodged the first volley of shots fired by Ethan Hayes and his team. The bullets, though they whistled past in a spray of sparks, barely slowed its advance. It retaliated by unleashing a deafening, inhuman shriek, a sound that shattered the survivors' resolve and forced many to recoil in agony. Dr. Weiss's device began to emit frantic beeps, recording erratic readings that suggested the creature was drawing energy from the very fabric of the station. "It's feeding off our fear," he gasped, his voice barely audible as he ducked behind a fallen console. Amid the chaos, personal revelations and desperate choices played out in real time. A young researcher named Tobias, whose earlier hesitation during the mimicry test had sown seeds of mistrust among his peers, now found himself at a crossroads. As he sprinted down the corridor, he came face to face with a figure that resembled his own reflection, a mirror image so perfect it forced him to question his own humanity. In that heart-stopping moment, Tobias hesitated, frozen in terror. Was it truly him, or a twisted imitation wrought by the creature's devious mimicry? The seconds stretched into an eternity before he mustered the courage to raise his trembling weapon. His shot rang out, but in the confusion that followed, neither friend nor foe could be reliably distinguished. Elsewhere, a grim confrontation unfolded near a sealed emergency exit. A seasoned technician named Sigrid, whose loyalty had been questioned in the days of fractured trust, now stood alone against the creature. In a flash of brutal determination, she activated a nearby control panel, attempting to seal the exit and trap the enemy within a confined space. The creature, however, met her defiance with a swift, ruthless motion, its form contorting to mimic her own terrified expression before lunging forward with a predatory ferocity. In that moment, Sigrid's sacrifice became inevitable. She fought valiantly to keep the barrier intact, even as the creature's mimicry momentarily unsettled her sense of self. Her final, desperate struggle was marked by a scream that echoed in the narrow corridor, a scream that would haunt the survivors long after her fall. The battle raged on with an intensity that defied description. Each surviving member of the team was forced to confront not only the monstrous entity, but also the horrifying possibility that the creature's ability to mimic could mean that anyone standing among them might no longer be who they seemed. Trust had become a luxury they could no longer afford. Every whispered word, every fleeting glance carried the potential for betrayal, and in the maelstrom of violence and uncertainty, alliances fractured further. Astrid, her hands slick with sweat as she clutched her tablet, monitored the creature's movements with a mix of scientific curiosity and personal dread. The data streaming across the screen was a chaotic symphony of energy spikes and erratic pulses. It was as if the creature were communicating, warning, perhaps, or challenging the very notions of life and death. "It's not just attacking," she realized aloud, her voice shaking. "It's testing us. It's learning our fears." Her words, though spoken in the midst of battle, carried a terrible clarity. The creature's actions were deliberate, its every move calculated to exploit the survivors' vulnerabilities. As the corridor transformed into a war zone, Dr. Falk rallied his dwindling forces for one last coordinated assault. "This is our final chance," he roared over the din of combat. "We stand together, or we fall divided." His voice was both a command and a plea, resonating in the minds of those who clung to the fragile hope of victory. With renewed determination, the survivors formed a defensive line near a reinforced bulkhead that had once served as a secure shelter. Their eyes, filled with terror and resolve in equal measure, fixed upon the creature as it advanced once more. In that moment, time fractured into a series of vignettes, snapshots of courage, of horror, and impossible choices. Ethan Hayes, leading a squad armed with makeshift incendiary devices and heavy-duty firearms, charged forward. Every explosion and every burst of gunfire was punctuated by the creature's anguished roar. Amid the chaos, key revelations emerged. The creature's mimicry was not an act of mindless savagery, but a calculated adaptation to its environment. It mirrored not only the appearances but the very instincts of its prey, turning their strengths into vulnerabilities. In doing so, It forced each survivor to confront the duality of their own nature, the capacity for both compassion and ruthless self-preservation. At one critical juncture, as the survivors pressed their attack, a sudden surge of movement caught Emily Shaw's eye. In the haze of smoke and shrapnel, she saw a figure that resembled her mentor, a man she had trusted implicitly. For a split second, her heart swelled with hope. But then, with a lurch of horror, she realized that the figure's eyes were devoid of warmth, replaced by a cold alien gleam. The revelation was a gut-wrenching blow. The creature had already infiltrated their ranks, masquerading as someone they loved and trusted. In that moment of betrayal, Emily was forced to make an impossible choice, one that would forever alter the balance between her rational mind and the raw, unfiltered fear that threatened to consume her. As the battle reached its fevered pitch, injuries piled up like casualties on a battlefield. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burning circuitry and the coppery tang of spilled blood. Bodies were strewn across the corridor, and the survivors' attempts to regroup were constantly thwarted by the creature's relentless onslaught. Each life lost was a painful reminder of the high cost of defiance, and each act of sacrifice, whether heroic or tragic, etched itself into the collective memory of the beleaguered team. In one final, desperate push, Dr. Weiss and a small contingent of survivors surged toward the creature's core, a darkened chamber at the end of a winding passageway where the alien force seemed to concentrate its power. The corridor was narrow and cluttered with debris, forcing them into a claustrophobic struggle where every moment was a battle for survival. The creature's roar reverberated through the walls, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of Glacier Point Station. With every step, the survivors faced not only the threat of the creature's physical might, but also the psychological terror of confronting a force that had already eroded the boundaries of human identity. In that crucible of conflict, impossible choices were made. A seasoned security officer, whose calm leadership had once been a stabilizing force, was forced to make a split-second decision that cost him dearly. As the creature lunged with a speed that defied description, he threw himself in front of a group of young researchers, absorbing the brunt of a devastating blow. His sacrifice, a final act of courage, allowed his comrades to momentarily seize the upper hand. Yet, as they paused to mourn his loss, a chilling realization set in. The line between hero and victim had blurred, leaving them to wonder whether any of them were truly in control of their own fate. The final confrontation came in a series of chaotic, heart-stopping moments that felt both eternal and fleeting. With the remnants of Glacier Point Station trembling around them, the survivors managed to isolate the creature within a sealed chamber, a desperate gambit that involved a combination of jury-rigged explosives and hastily reactivated security protocols. The air in the chamber was thick with tension as Falk, Emily, Astrid, Ethan, and Weiss stood together. Their faces a tapestry of fear, resolve, and resignation. They had come to the end of the line, a final stand where the cost of failure would be the annihilation of everything they held dear. "Now," Falk whispered, his voice barely audible above the roar of the containment system. "This is our moment. We either end this here, or we let it consume us all." His words, heavy with finality, were met with a silent, determined nod from each survivor. In that instant, the chamber became a battleground of wills, humanity versus the unknowable, hope versus despair. The countdown began, each tick of the clock echoing like a death knell in the hearts of those present. As the timer approached zero, the survivors braced themselves for the inevitable explosion. The creature's final, defiant roar was swallowed by the rising crescendo of detonations and collapsing metal. In a blinding flash of light and sound, the sealed chamber erupted, the force of the blast reverberating through every corridor of Glacier Point Station. For an agonizing moment, everything was reduced to chaos, a swirling maelstrom of fire, debris, and raw emotion. When the light finally receded and silence once more fell upon the battered station, the survivors emerged from their hiding places with trembling limbs and tear-streaked faces. They moved cautiously through the ruins, their eyes scanning every shadow for a sign that the creature might still be lurking among them. The cost of the final stand was written in every scar and every weary sigh. They had confronted the alien terror head-on, and while the creature's presence had been momentarily blotted out by the explosion, its legacy of ambiguity and loss lingered like a specter over the survivors. In the days that followed, as rescue teams from distant outposts finally reached the ravaged remains of Glacier Point Station, the survivors were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. They recounted the events of the final confrontation in hushed tones, their narratives filled with both heroic defiance and the bitter taste of loss. Friendships that had been forged in the fires of conflict were now tinged with lingering doubts, and every face bore the marks of a battle that had questioned the very nature of humanity. Yet even amid the chaos and heartache, there remained a flicker of hope, a belief that in the struggle against an enemy that can mimic and corrupt, The unyielding spirit of human resilience might yet prevail. Dr. Falk, with his voice heavy with sorrow and resolve, spoke to the gathered survivors one final time. We have lost much tonight. We have not lost who we are. Our pain, our sacrifices, they remind us that even in our darkest moments, our capacity for love, for unity, remains unbroken. His words, echoing in the silent aftermath of the siege, offered a tenuous promise that the human heart can endure, even when confronted by the unthinkable. Astrid, still clutching her tablet as if to hold onto the fragments of truth that had guided her through the madness, added softly, "This battle has revealed our fears, our doubts, and our failures. But it has also shown us that we are capable of rising from the ashes. We will rebuild, not only our station, but the bonds that hold us together." Her voice wavered with emotion as she recalled the faces of those who had fallen, and the sacrifices made in the name of survival. As the survivors began the slow, arduous process of recovery, they could not escape the lingering ambiguity of that final stand. The creature's nature had remained partly shrouded in mystery, a puzzle of mimicry, adaptation, and relentless aggression that defied all conventional understanding. Its actions had forced each of them to confront the paradox of their existence, that the line between monster and human, between hope and despair, was as fragile as the ice upon which they had once thrived. In the quiet moments of reflection that followed the chaos, questions that had no easy answers continued to haunt their dreams. Who among them was still truly human? And what price would they pay to reclaim the trust and unity that had been so brutally torn asunder? In the end, as the battered survivors gathered in the remnants of the central atrium to honor those lost and to face the uncertain dawn, they knew that the final stand was not an end, but the beginning of a long journey toward healing. The echoes of that high-tension battle, with its interplay of survival instincts, fear, and last-minute revelations, would remain etched in their souls, a reminder that sometimes the hardest battles are fought not only against an external enemy, but within the depths of one's own heart. And so, with heavy hearts, yet an undying spark of determination, the survivors of Glacier Point Station stepped forward into an ambiguous future. They had faced the creature at its most terrifying, made impossible choices in the name of survival, and learned that even in the midst of chaos and loss, the human spirit endures. The final stand had come to pass, and while its scars would remain forever, it also had forged in them resilient hope, a hope that no matter how deep the darkness, the light of humanity would always find a way to shine through. Chapter 10. Echoes in the Ice. The frozen horizon stretched endlessly under a sky of perpetual twilight, a bleak canvas upon which the remnants of human ambition and unspeakable horror were etched in ice. In the aftermath of the siege at Glacier Point Station, the surviving members of the research team now found themselves wandering the shattered corridors of their once proud outpost, haunted by the memories of loss and betrayal. Every footstep echoed in the vast silence of the Antarctic, where the wind carried voices of the departed and the uncertain promise of what might still lurk beneath the ice. It had been weeks since the final explosion that sealed the creature away, or so they believed. Dr. Henrik Falk, whose leadership had once been the bedrock of the station's unity, now moved with a measured gait along the frostbitten corridors. His eyes, once filled with unwavering determination, now betrayed a profound weariness and sorrow. Every fractured panel, every shattered shard of glass in the wreckage of the command hub, was a testament to the desperate battle fought here. In the dim light that seeped through gaps in the damaged structure, he could still see the silhouettes of those lost and feel the oppressive presence of an enemy that had not entirely vanished. In a makeshift common room, cobbled together from salvaged equipment and remnants of what was once a vibrant gathering space, Astrid Nygaard sat hunched over her tablet. The data she had gathered during the siege still pulsed in cryptic patterns on the screen, erratic spikes and plunging dips that defied easy explanation. Every fluctuation reminded her that, even now, the creature's influence might not be completely extinguished. "There is something here," she would murmur to herself in the long hours of the night. "An echo that refuses to die." Her internal voice, laced with both scientific curiosity and existential dread, sought to make sense of a phenomenon that had upended everything they had known. Emily Shaw, whose gentle eyes had borne witness to too many horrors, walked slowly along a corridor that led to a large observation window. Outside, the Antarctic landscape lay vast and unyielding, a frozen wilderness that had always been indifferent to human suffering. Yet now, as she stared out at the endless expanse of ice and snow, she felt an uncanny chill not born of the weather, but of the lingering uncertainty in her heart. "Have we truly contained it?" she whispered, almost inaudibly, as if afraid that the wind itself might carry her question to some hidden ear. Memories of the creature's shifting form, of its ability to mimic the faces of the fallen, haunted her thoughts. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw those grotesque reflections staring back at her, challenging her every conviction about what was real. Ethan Hayes, the steadfast pilot who had risked everything to rescue his comrades, now manned a portable radio in a corner of the station's debris-strewn control room. His rugged face was lined with exhaustion, and his voice, when he spoke to no one in particular, carried the weight of all he had witnessed. "The silence," he would say, his tone heavy with both relief and dread. "It's as if the ice itself is whispering secrets, remembering all that has been lost." He recalled the desperate moments during the siege when every explosion and every anguished cry seemed to merge with the howling winds outside. Now, in the eerie calm that had settled over Glacier Point Station, he could not shake the sense that something vital still lay hidden beneath the surface. Dr. Malcolm Weiss, whose analytical mind had once offered clarity amid chaos, now sat in an isolated alcove, meticulously re-examining the residual data from the final stand. His normally precise calculations had given way to an uncertain fascination with anomalies that defied explanation. "It's as if the creature has left us a message in these echoes," he muttered, running his calloused fingers over pages of annotated graphs with spectral readings. He wondered if what they had witnessed was not a final conclusive defeat, but merely a temporary reprieve, a lull before the inevitable resurgence of a threat that might have been dormant for millennia. The survivors had gathered periodically in what remained of the central atrium, the heart of Glacier Point Station, to share their recollections and to attempt to rebuild some semblance of order amid the chaos. In these solemn meetings, the atmosphere was charged with quiet intensity. They spoke in hushed tones about the desperate measures taken during the siege, about the acts of heroism and the bitter betrayals that had cut deep into their souls. Every story was interlaced with questions that had no answers. Was the creature truly vanquished, or had it merely retreated into the labyrinth of ice below? Could the echoes of its presence be heard in the faint vibrations that occasionally rattled the station's walls? And most haunting of all, had the terror it invoked already seeped into their hearts so completely that they might never be the ethane again? One cold evening, as a fragile sun struggled to break through a blanket of swirling snow, the survivors assembled around a flickering heater in the remains of the command hub. Dr. Falk addressed them in a voice that trembled with both determination and resignation. "We have fought, and we have lost," he said, his gaze sweeping over the weary faces before him. "Yet even now, in the silence that follows our battle, the question remains. Is the threat truly contained, or does it lie in wait, hidden in the ice, ready to rise once more?" His words, though spoken softly, reverberated in the hearts of all present. A long, pensive silence followed. Astrid, her eyes red from sleepless nights, finally spoke. "Every measurement, every anomaly we recorded hints at something unresolved. The energy spikes, the subtle shifts in the electromagnetic field. They suggest that whatever we faced may not be gone for good." Her voice was measured and analytical, yet there was a tremor of fear that she could not disguise. "I cannot shake the feeling that the ice itself remembers," she added, glancing out of the window that remained intact. Outside, the Antarctic landscape was as still as a tomb, its frozen surface belying the secrets it concealed. Emily Shaw, sitting cross-legged on a piece of salvaged metal near the window, nodded slowly. "I have spent countless hours poring over ancient records, trying to understand the myths and legends that speak of forces lying dormant beneath the ice," she said quietly. "It seems that nature has a way of preserving its mysteries, even as we try to unravel them. What if our actions have only awakened a part of something far greater than we can comprehend? What if this is only the beginning of a cycle, a recurrence of events that have been foretold, but never truly understood?" Her words were laced with a resigned melancholy that resonated with everyone in the room. Ethan Hayes, who had been silently monitoring external conditions on his portable radio, interjected with a note of cautious optimism. "I've been listening to the weather reports and the seismic data," he said. "There have been irregular tremors beneath the ice, small quakes that could be nothing more than the shifting of ice. But they might also be the stirrings of something else, a movement deep within the frozen bedrock." He paused, glancing at his comrades. "I don't want to sound alarmist, but the uncertainty is maddening. It's as if the station and the entire continent are holding their breath, waiting for the next act in this terrible drama." Dr. Weiss, who had been meticulously annotating his findings, looked up from his notes. "Our data is ambiguous," he admitted. "The creature's influence appears to extend beyond the immediate vicinity of the station. There are faint signals, almost imperceptible, that suggest residual energy deep within the ice. We have yet to determine whether these are the echoes of an extinct threat or the precursors to a resurgence. It is a question that may never be definitively answered." His tone was clinical, yet the uncertainty in his eyes revealed the burden of responsibility that he carried. As the conversation wore on into the long polar night, the survivors found themselves caught between the desire to believe that the nightmare was over and the terror that the ice itself might be a living, malevolent force. They recalled the horrors of the siege with a visceral clarity, the desperate scramble for survival, the moments when human nature had been pushed to its breaking point, the impossible choices that had cost them dearly. And yet, even as they recounted these events, a pervasive sense of ambiguity clung to them like the ever-present frost. Each new sound in the distance, each creak of the deteriorating structure, was a reminder that the past was not easily laid to rest. In the days that followed, small expeditions were organized to probe the surrounding ice. Armed with thermal imagers, seismic sensors, and a fragile hope, teams ventured out into the vast, unyielding wilderness. Their goal was to search for signs of residual energy, to determine whether the creature's influence had truly been contained or if it lurked unseen beneath the frozen surface. One such team, led by Astrid, trekked across miles of treacherous ice fields under a sky that seemed to press down upon them with oppressive silence. Each step was a struggle against both the elements and the mounting dread that every gust of wind might carry with it a portent of doom. On one fateful expedition, Astrid's team discovered a series of deep fissures in the ice that pulsed with a faint, otherworldly glow. The phenomenon was subtle, barely detectable against the pure white of the ice, but it was not enough to set their nerves on edge. "This is not natural," Astrid said, her voice echoing in the vast emptiness. "It is as if the ice itself is alive, responding to something hidden within." The team collected data and samples, but the measurements only deepened the mystery. There was a rhythmic pulse, a cadence that defied the randomness of geological processes. In that moment, Astrid felt a chill that had nothing to do with the frigid air, a profound existential chill that spoke of ancient forces and unresolved terrors. Back at Glacier Point Station, the survivors began to rebuild what little they could from the ruins. The station's corridors were slowly cleared of debris, and emergency power was restored to a few critical systems. Yet even as the physical structure was patched together, the intangible scars ran deep. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the wind outside seemed to mourn the losses of the past, the survivors gathered in small groups to share memories, to honor those who had fallen, and to speculate about the future. Their conversations were marked by a fragile blend of hope and resignation, as if they were trying to grasp at the remnants of a dream that had turned into a waking nightmare. Dr. Falk organized a final debriefing in the rebuilt command hub. Standing before a group of gaunt, haunted faces, he spoke in a measured tone that belied the tumult of his inner thoughts. "We have come far, and we have endured horrors that few could imagine," he said. "Yet as we look out onto this frozen landscape, we must ask ourselves, is our struggle truly over? Has the threat been contained, or do the echoes in the ice portend a future we are not ready to face?" His words, heavy with implication, left a lingering uncertainty that none could dismiss. That evening, as twilight bled into a starless night, Emily Shaw stepped out onto the station's roof, a precarious platform of rusted metal and ice, and gazed out over the vast Antarctic expanse. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant howling of the wind. In that solitude, she allowed herself to wonder what secrets lay hidden beneath the ice. The unanswered questions swirled in her mind. Was the creature's final stand merely a temporary reprieve? Did its essence seep into the frozen depths, biding its time until it could rise again? Darkness offered no answers, only an ambiguous promise of more mysteries to come. Over the following weeks, as rescue teams from distant outposts arrived to aid in the recovery efforts, the survivors at Glacier Point Station worked to document every detail of their ordeal. Their reports, filled with scientific data and personal testimonies, painted a picture of horror and resilience, a chronicle of an encounter that defied conventional explanation. Yet even as they compiled their findings, a quiet disquiet lingered. Every question led to more questions. Was the creature truly dead, or had it become one with the ice? Could his mimicry have altered someone beyond recognition? And most haunting of all, had the station itself become a monument to a terror that would someday awaken anew? In the long, bitter nights that followed, as the survivors attempted to resume normalcy amid the ruins, a sense of foreboding permeated every moment. The Antarctic winds carried with them whispers that might have been the echoes of the past or the harbingers of a future yet to unfold. In hushed conversations around flickering campfires, and in the quiet solitude of rebuilt quarters, they spoke of omens and portents, a strange unyielding feeling that the ice was not finished with them. Every tremor in the ground, every flicker of light in the endless night, was enough to send a shiver down their spines and a knot into their hearts. And so, as the final days at Glacier Point Station drew to a close, the survivors convened one last time in the refurbished command hub. There, surrounded by the remnants of their shattered sanctuary, they reflected on all that had transpired, the heroism, the heartbreak, and the inexplicable phenomena that have forever altered their understanding of life. Dr. Falk's voice, now soft and reflective, broke the silence. We have faced an enemy that defied all our expectations. And though we stand here battered and uncertain, we must remember that our journey does not end with this chapter. The echoes in the ice are a part of us now. They are the legacy of our struggle. A reminder that the unknown is never truly conquered, only delayed. Astrid added, "Every measurement we took, every anomaly we recorded tells a story that remains incomplete. We may never have all the answers, and perhaps that is a truth that we must learn to live with." Emily, her eyes moist with both sorrow and a stubborn glimmer of hope, nodded in agreement. The future is uncertain, and the ice holds secrets that we cannot even imagine. But in that uncertainty, there is also the possibility of new beginnings, a chance to rebuild, to learn, and to grow stronger from our experiences. As the survivors dispersed into the frigid expanse of a tentative new dawn, the Antarctic landscape stood as both a tomb and a cradle, a silent witness to the horrors that unfolded, and a keeper of mysteries yet to be revealed. The winds whispered across the ice, carrying with them the unresolved echoes of a terror that might one day rise again. In that haunting melody, the survivors found no comfort, only the enduring reminder that some questions remain forever unanswered. In the final moments of that long, arduous journey, as the station survivors prepared to leave behind the remnants of Glacier Point Station and return to a world that would never be the same, a lingering uncertainty clung to their hearts. Had they truly vanquished the creature? Or had it simply receded into the icy depths, biding its time until the moment to strike once more? The silence of the Antarctic, vast and implacable, offered no clear answer, only the perpetual promise of mystery and the echo of a distant, unyielding threat. And so, with heavy hearts and minds forever changed, they stepped away from the ruins of their shattered refuge, leaving behind a legacy of pain, courage, and unanswered questions. The frozen wastes of Antarctica stretched out before them, vast and inscrutable, as if guarding the secrets of the past with an indifferent, eternal resolve. In that open, desolate landscape, the echoes in the ice continued to whisper, a haunting refrain that would linger long after they had gone, a final, ambiguous promise that the unknown was never truly defeated. As the survivors vanished into the icy horizon, one thing remained clear. The story was far from over. The ice, cold and relentless, would keep its secrets close, and in its quiet, unyielding depths, the potential for resurgence lurked like a shadow waiting for its moment. The final echoes of Glacier Point Station, borne on the wind and etched into the frozen earth, left behind a question that would haunt humanity for generations. What if the horror was not ended, but only postponed? What if, beneath the endless expanse of ice, a dormant threat stirred in the silence, waiting for the moment to reawaken and remind the world that some mysteries are eternal? Thus, as the Antarctic winds sighed over the barren plains and the station's ruins slowly succumbed to the relentless passage of time, the haunting mystery endured, a mystery that would continue to echo in the ice, inviting those brave enough to listen to imagine what might come next. Other books by Kamal Khalaf. The Autopsy of Jane Doe, a horror mystery. Deus Ex Machina, a sci-fi thriller. Dream Stealers, a sci-fi horror. The Lightkeepers, a psychological thriller. The Lighthouse, a psychological horror. Buried Alive, a thriller. And 536 AD, the worst year to be alive in the history of humankind. This has been The Thing, a horror. Written by Kamal Khalaf. Narrated by Alex Johnston. Copyright 2025 by Kamal Khalaf. Production copyright by Kamal Khalaf.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.